Welcome back.
I get the stuff early.
Oh my
Pardon?
gosh.
I usually get
Richard,
the stuff early.
will you go ask
Need to continue to work on it.
yourself to start?
Realistically, this was something we probably should have dealt with.
First.
We have another meeting next Wednesday, right?
Yeah.
Can we postpone this till next Wednesday?
So the hearing's today, the adoption's next Wednesday.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
This is just a draft.
Got it.
So unlike the first and second interim where it's like rolled into one, this is split into two.
Okay.
So we are back, reconvening to open session. And get, if Robert would lead us in the flag salute, please.
Ready? Salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So, report out of closed session, please, Mark.
Yeah, we had some discussions about those items. We talked about transfers out of district. We talked about the stipulated agreement that I had to, and some other minor issues we got going.
Thank you.
There were no action items other than to acknowledge the stipulated and transfers out.
Okay. Tessa, you're up.
That was very quick. And oh my gosh, you let me in late, so I didn't remember that I still have the Aladdin green screen.
It's very nice.
Okay, it's reality. There you go. Okay, well, hello, everybody. We just now, right before this meeting, had our all WTA end of year party. We had some Kemmy's pies and sparkling cider, and we toasted to the strangest year like no other in the history of humankind. From our site reports, at the high school, I know that the Peace Garden is being put together by Carol and Ryan and students. I hear that morale is really high on their campus, and people are really excited to be back and working there on the campus. Excuse me. Gloucester Lane is going to have a 5th grade promotion drive-through parade on Thursday at 12:45. Brookside is doing their kindergarten promotion as a drive-through as well. The roof repairs have been started over at Brookside, and there's been some challenges with that. Sanhedrin is having Student of the Year, the Principal's Award, and the Hawk Awards will be awarded on June 9th. That's kind of pretty much it on site reports. I'd like to double check that this is our last school board meeting with Mr. Westerberg.
Nope. I'm punishing you one more time.
Correct?
June 16th.
Nope. Okay.
We
Then
have,
I'll just save my comments for that.
we have a June 16th
That's it for
meeting.
WTA. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tessa. Dan, are you out there in the wings?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi, Dan.
Hello.
I'd like to thank everybody for putting up with a different kind of year. And I think the classified leadership has nominated all classified people to be the person of our year because everybody did good. And for that matter, I think everybody at the whole school district did good. I think hopefully next year it all changes. And looking forward to moving on, having a big summer with a whole bunch of disruptions. Have a good night.
Thanks, Dan.
Can I add something to that, you guys? This is Jenny.
Go ahead.
I just want to say that Bechtel Grove's also having a drive-through promotion, June 10th at 6 o'clock. And I know we can't all go, but you know, they're having one too. So just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
And what time is that going to occur?
6.
6 o'clock. Thanks, Jenny, I had it on my note.
Okay. We have board comments. Paula, will you start us off?
Sure. I had a really fun day today, a little different than my norm. I went to Sanhedrin and I got to go to the Student Award Assembly. And then I got to come back and go to the adult school graduation. I don't know what it was called, but it was really, really a very good thing. The school is real supportive of all of its people. It's been in the paper a lot and everything else. But tonight, this afternoon, I was really, really fortunate enough to see a number of people. And the adults this time, there was only one person I found over 40, and everybody else was like 18 or 19 to about 25. And what they were doing was going back and seeing the need for their diploma and getting it. Mr. Horton was the master of ceremonies or whatever, but people came, you'd have thought it was the regular graduation instead of just 10 people dropping by, a couple others saying, good job, dear. But no, it was a real big deal, and I just found it absolutely exciting. So next year, y'all ought to try going. The other thing that I've been doing is looking into some issues that concern budgets and writing policies and things like that. And so we'll see, not in our next meeting because that's next week, but after that, how I can kind of contribute on where people can go to learn to read budgets in a easy to understand way, and how we can consider whether or not averages are the best way for us to do things, or the mean and the mode are the best way for us to compare our district with others. Okay, and that truly is about it, except that, you know, the year is slowing down finally. And after all the issues with summer school and everything else, it looks like maybe we'll get to a settle not much later than July or August. Okay.
You mean the normal mathematical
The normal
mean?
mathematical mean,
Oh,
yeah.
that mean,
Yeah,
not
you know that
being
mean?
mean?
Oh, no, I
Okay.
also mean rotten and horrible, no.
Because I know the other.
Yeah, me too.
Ms. King.
Good evening, everybody, and I've been thinking a lot about it. I wasn't here when Mark was hired, but I have been really impressed with Mark's work ethic. And he's moving on, he's got a couple weeks left. Most people, if they're moving on and have a couple weeks left, are sort of gotten out of the saddle a little bit and easing off. But Mark is trying to get stuff done here and trying to leave the district with everything that he'd like to see the district left with before he goes. And he wants to hand over the district to the new superintendent with certain things, with things accomplished. And I just really admire that work ethic, and I'm going to miss it, Mark. I happened to visit with Mark over there where they pulled up the tanks, the diesel tanks at the high school, and it's so interesting to me. He's dealing with all these people and talking to all these people and trying to get things taken care of and making phone calls, and he's the superintendent, you know, he's not the construction manager, and yet he was there making sure that things got done. And anyway, I really admire that work ethic, and I am going to miss Mark. So, and I also wanted to say that I completed the Masters in Governance program with the California School Board Association. It required attending 6 classes online over a period of about 3 months this year, and I decided that if I was going to be a school board member, I was going to try to be an effective, informed school board member. And I got a lot out of the Masters in Governance classes, and I hope it'll help me to be a more effective school board member. And I just wanted to thank everybody, the staff, for all their hard work this year in trying to make this very strange year work for our kids. And I know that everybody's gone out of their way to see that that has happened, so thank you.
Diane?
I want to thank all of you at CSEA and our WTA and all the employees and people, families of Willits Unified School District, learning distance learning as well as Zoom meetings and myself, Google meetings, and to our graduates, congratulations. And for those parents, all your family that you've been having for 18 years is going off, and I know how that separation is going to be, but congratulations for raising some wonderful kids.
Thank you, Robert. Okay. Good evening, and I would also like to extend my appreciation to Mark for his hard work, because he is always out there. Every time I'm out at some place, Mark is there. So thank you very much for all that.
I'm stalking you, Robert.
So thank you for stalking me then, because a lot of work got done. I appreciate that. Also, I'd like to extend appreciation to all our families and all our staff. Here we had a different year than we've ever had, but here we are, and kids are graduating, and things are getting done, and I know our secondary schools are in there getting those last credits in, making sure all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and I know it's a hard work. So thank you to all those staff members that have made it happen, and to those counselors who are out there working hard, getting everything done and getting our graduations and promotions together. But just thank everyone for making this such a wonderful school district and making it happen for our kids. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to putting the COVID year in the rearview mirror. I'm just so thankful that we've gotten through this with locally a relatively minor amount of tragedy associated with COVID. Certainly there have been plenty of families in Mendocino County that have been affected by it. I believe that the dashboard right now says that there were 50 people have lost their lives in Mendocino County as of a couple of days ago. I looked at the numbers today, and fortunately the trending is going back down. I know there's been a bit of a surge here recently, but the numbers are trending back down, which is a good thing. I'm hoping that when we reach open school in the fall, we are back to business as usual, having learned a tremendous amount from our experience with COVID in terms of delivering distance education and the utilization of information technologies and how we can leverage those kind of new skills in the classrooms and deliver even a better product, hopefully, than what we have in the past, thanks to those new skills. I too am going to miss Mark's dedication to the district. His work ethic has been nothing short of phenomenal. Clearly a very hands-on individual, and that's something I can very much appreciate. It's very much the way I tend to operate, and I'm just very much appreciative of that kind of work ethic. I asked Mark to kind of give me a quick rundown of some of the things that he feels most proud of over his tenure with Willits, and I'd like to run down them with you, and so you guys get a little bit of an idea. At one point in time, not very long ago, we had students that were faced, especially A to G students, were faced with minimal opportunities for CTE opportunities because of our school schedule, our semester-based schedule. Mark brought us a trimester system, which provides us a number of different avenues that allow kids to have, in our particular case this year, what'd you say, 79
of the 80 graduates.
79 of our 80 graduates will be graduating high school with a CTE endorsement. When I got on the board, we had just passed, or we were in the throes of the aftermath of a bond issue that was a disaster that continued being a disaster for several years thereafter. When Mark came to the district, we basically told him that there's no possible way that a bond is ever going to pass again in any kind of a near future. It became clear to Mark, and he convinced the board to move forward with a bond issue. It failed the first time around, but with perseverance and a lot of dedication to getting this passed, the bond issue passed. And I firmly believe that without having passed that bond issue, this district would have been in critically dire conditions financially without it. Thanks to the bond issue, numerous facility improvements are ongoing right now and will be ongoing for years to come, thanks to us passing that bond issue. Again, Mark drove that bus. He was also responsible for close to $1 million in grant funds coming into the district. I want to also point out that none of these things are Mark's doing alone. They took the effort of a great number of you across the district, in the admin office, as well as in each of the sites, and not to mention the backing of the board to drive many of these things. Replaced almost all the fleet vehicles in transportation and maintenance, in addition to some of the things that are not necessarily considered fleet. For example, there's a bucket truck out there that we can use now for cleaning the stuff that's up high and do so safely. I believe there's a mini excavator now that we no longer have to go rent one and utilize for doing significant projects around the district. Adult ed is back in place, as Paula noted today, that they had the graduation ceremony today. Very proud of that. Sanhedrin changed to a vocational alternate ed high school, obviously with certain benefits there. Several multi-year contracts have been signed and done with WTA and CSEA. Our base teacher pay is $8,000 a year higher than, and 8 steps fewer on that salary schedule. That clearly benefits incoming teachers and realistically teachers that stay here for the tenure. District finances are in better shape despite clearly some very turbulent years up until now, and I'm very pleased with that. When I got on the board, our district was in very dire financial position, and I'm pleased to say that we don't have to worry about whether or not we can buy medication for our children. Things are moving forward in a much better position today than they were even a year ago. Some of it's thanks to COVID, but no small amount of it's also thanks to being conservative and making good decisions with respect to how we manage the budget. Clearly, Mark has helped lead us through this pandemic. It's something that none of us could have anticipated, and it took a lot of us to try and figure out the best way to get it through, but Mark basically took the lead on that. All of our site buildings were under targeted state assistance. Now none are, and almost every high school student now graduates with a CTE endorsement. This is just a short list. There are many, many other things, some small, some large, but again, many thanks to you, Mr. Westerberg.
Thank you.
So I've got my white horse.
5th through 8th grade at Sherwood.
5th through 8th grade at Sherwood. And expanded our opportunities for, struggling for the words, for alternate education. So, let's see, we are at the superintendent comments. Mark?
Well, I was going to comment about adult ed because, you know, one of the oddities in California is they've cut all the money for adult ed. I mean, there's hardly any money at all. So we run on a shoestring at adult ed. I mean, we essentially get enough money to pay John Horton to teach the classes.
It's about $16,000 a year.
Yeah. But those kids who are in there, the reason Paula saw the dynamics is that because kids, if they go to Sanhedrin and they don't graduate, we don't go, well, you're dropped out. We make sure those kids are signed up for adult ed. We don't let them go. We keep them in adult ed. They hound them every year like, okay, you haven't been here in 6 months. You're still signed up for adult ed. You know, we don't have to worry about Aries and dropping them and all that stuff. So it's a huge thing to have adult ed. And it's really about the building, taking care of business. You know, the bond issue is a lot of fun, but it's also a lot of headaches. You know, we've struck everything, including oil, in the front parking lot. And that is all mitigated now. It's all cleaned up. They'll have the stuff taken away by Friday. And graduation is at 5 o'clock on Friday here at the high school. And they have guaranteed me that the road coming in from Main Street back to the parking lot here will be passable. It's not going to be paved, it'll be passable. But those are issues. I appreciate that the teachers have worked through the construction. We can't get contractors to just come June 15th to August 15th. They have jobs all year long, and we get them when they're available. And so Blosser went through a month of giant woodpeckers knocking on the roof all day long, but we got it done. They're starting now at Brookside for the next couple days. Then they're going to move to Bechtel and do the roof. They're going to do the roof at the high school last. But by mid-June or late June, we'll have all of our major facilities re-roofed. And we'll have our parking lot here fixed up. So there's a lot of projects. If you ever come in my office, there's a whiteboard. And I have so many things going right now. Maddie had to put in a whiteboard in maintenance to keep track of them. And so all of those projects are lined up, ready to go. And as my office knows, I always usually tell them, I'm the idea person, you folks are the detail people. And so you're right, everybody has pitched in to do that. The teachers have made good, positive change. CSEA's made a ton of change. The district office functions as well as any office I've ever been in. And they get along with each other and they do the right thing. And so those things are all happening and going to be in good place. Financially, we've survived some crazy times. And when I first got here, that was a major issue. Is when I met with the board privately, we got to be concerned about finance. It's not like we've made it to St. Helena status, but we've made it out of the hole, and we're not trending the wrong way. That's the good thing. We'll never have enough. We'll never make the teachers pay or CSEAs pay high enough to pay them for what some of them are worth. We're never going to have that kind of money. But the reality is people do their thing and do what they're supposed to, and it makes a big difference. High school graduation is going to be a little different this year. If you've been to high school graduation, normally the kids are on the field. This year the kids are going to be in the stands, spread apart distantly. The board and myself will be out in front on the track. All of the parents will be out in the circular infield because we can use the space of the circular infield to space them out into their family groups of 6. And afterwards, you know, every time you do something different, some things stick and some things don't. Apparently, a parade of downtown, or processional, because it can't be a parade. A parade, you have to block off streets and get a permit. Our processional is one of those things that have stuck. So afterwards, they're going to do a processional through town. And the banners that hang along the city through the streets, a couple years ago, we talked about it. Last year, we put them into place. Now we have a bucket truck where our guys can put them up and take them down. And those are a good thing. So COVID was rough, but we learned some things from it. My guess is a lot more people are going to be washing their hands more often than they used to. My guess is if Brookside has what they normally have, when the flu hits at Brookside, every kid gives it to every other kid. My guess is in normal school world now, we might think, hey, maybe we ought to put masks on today while we're in the room and stop that transmission. So we learned some things. You know, financially, I think the state was a disaster area on how they put money out, but, you know, Nikki and I virtually every day go, oh my God, which fund is this coming out of? What's the timeline for this one to end? And it's a mess, and they could have made it easy, but they didn't, and that's legislature. Legislatures cannot do education, okay? They pass rules with no idea of what really happens. But we're getting there, we're in a good position. Joe's gonna come in for 3 days next week. We're gonna go through some transition stuff. Obviously, I don't want him to do what I would do. He needs to do what he was gonna do. But he has my cell phone number. I expect he'll get perspective from me. You know, when I came here, I got perspective from others. So that's important. So in regards to other stuff that's going on, you're gonna see that next week, a ton of other construction things are gonna hit. All of our construction has been centered locally with local contractors. Roundtree's gonna be doing glass work at the high school. They're gonna be doing glass work at Bechtel. We have a lot of local contractors involved doing it. So we're trying to help stimulate the economy on our own. My biggest issue that I have to make sure I get a handle on is I have no idea the financial implications we just bought at the high school parking lot. Taking out 4,000 gallons of 20, 30-year-old diesel fuel. But what's gonna happen is, Nikki and I have talked about this, we're gonna have to ride with the bond money we have to pay the bills. And we're gonna work on getting a mitigating source. I believe I've been told by 3 different people and made the initial contacts. There's money available for mitigating hazardous waste. And so we're gonna try and get those funds. This is kind of the fund balance discussion. Our fund balance right now in the bond issue is we haven't started the Brookside project yet. I left $1 million on the Brookside project intentionally because that might be the cost of taking those all down and putting in new. I have another solution that might be less expensive, but right now, we're not gonna hit that project until next summer. But we need to hit the ground running as soon as we can hit it in June to get it done in time for school. So we're gonna use that money. So what you're gonna see as a board member is you're gonna go, wow, the funds for doing Brookside went way down. Well, in anticipation of getting other funds for mitigating hazardous waste. And so that's gonna be one of the things you'll see financially that'll be a little bit different. And you'll see we're applying they've come in the form of a grant, but it's not a competitive grant. You write the grant based on showing what you have and what you're doing. To be honest with you, I had these people come and clean it up as fast as I could, regardless of funding, because we just can't have a parking lot full of diesel fuel. We just had to get it out. And so it's really important that we got through that quickly. And it's all gone, it's all done, we're repaving. The high school people got to experience where am I gonna park today? They'll have where am I gonna park tomorrow? And after Friday, it'll be a lot better. But there's a lot of those things still gonna happen and gonna happen all through the summer. So just be prepared that you'll go, oh, when did they start on this? When did they start that project? So there's gonna be a ton of them. And we're spending the money well. I have my oversight committee tomorrow. We're gonna go to each site and walk through the sites. But we're in a good position. So Nikki's done a great job of trying to get us organized with where we're gonna spend not just bond funds, but COVID funds. So getting this budget to you tonight is a minor miracle. Getting the LCAP to you, all I can tell you is next week I'm gonna get red pen from the end of this week till next week we meet. I'm gonna get red pen by the county to tell me what wording they didn't like or whatever. And so when we come back, there'll be some minor changes to the draft that you got. The reality is it's part of our normal funding. 80% of that's gonna be tied up in personnel. So we're in a good place. COVID will be over. The intention for next year is to start as a normal year and do all those, unless things go crazy over the summer, we're gonna start the year up with the intention of being in a 5-period trimester at the high school. our trimester schedule at the middle school and starting our normal days at all our other sites. So we're planning to be back at normal. That's how we're staffing, both custodial maintenance, transportation. Maddie's loading up transportation. We're building routes for next year, just like we've had in the past. So next year, the kitchens that are gonna be producing will be the high school and Blosser and shipping out the entrees. So all of those plans we had pre-COVID are gonna be in place, so. That's it for now.
Very good, thank you.
Mark, what time do you want to set the high school stadium?
Well, Robert,
Graduation.
you're the guest speaker, so you have to be there at least by 4.
I will be there.
No, you guys need to be there at 4:30.
4:30?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was trying to tell Diane that was a rookie assignment. She wasn't buying it.
And that's on Friday.
That is on Friday at 4:30, and you'll be here early enough that you probably find a place to park. We're gonna open up the transportation building again to park. And so if you wanna park in transportation, it's an easy way to get out.
And there's some call for showers on Friday, so.
It's graduation.
That's always, yeah.
You know, based on the little rain we've got, I'm not so sure people would be even disappointed to have it rain at graduation.
Right.
So,
Okay. We are at the consent agenda. Are there any public comments on the consent agenda? Looking out at the,
I'm sort of public, let me see, look out there.
Gallery.
There you go.
Are there any public comments on the consent agenda? And I'm assuming everybody's having no problems getting in. I don't think I've gotten any.
It should be open.
yeah. Just some clarification to make sure you know some of these terms. Perkins is basically like a CTE grant, okay? And the CTE Incentive Grant is an incentive grant to do CTE, and they base it off, there's a formula. But you have to apply and you have to get approved to do it. And the CIF is just basically, you have to have, you have to designate that you're gonna be in a league and who you're gonna be in a league with and who your representatives are, so. Those are standard things.
Got it. Paul?
I have questions on the Perkins application, just some questions, and I have questions on number 4, the employee status changes. The easiest ones, I guess, is we probably don't need to pull it up, I just need to know why. Okay, well, it says that it's a $16,284 budget, and then what they do is take like 15,000 was pulled off for one thing, and then $1,284 was used for limited English language acquisition students. And so I had a couple of questions about that and why the amount is $16,284, except that you just said there's a
Yeah,
formula, so
Yeah.
it's taken off of our 20 million or whatever dollar budget, and then it's,
Well,
No.
they take it off your AD.
It's,
Oh, the ADA?
it's a separate grant. I believe it's a federal grant, but it
It is.
is held by CDE, and CDE has particular criteria for the applicants, so, like demographic information,
Right.
enrollment information. It's
The-
not necessarily a formula based on our budget, it's based on their total funds available, and then they allocate that to us. So 16,000 roughly is how much is available to us for that particular grant.
to Willits, because of Willits' size and demographics.
Right, and the EL number comes based on the percentage of EL.
And I
Okay.
wasn't, so I have never seen, from the expenditures side, the involvement of EL in the
Right,
use
I
of
haven't
that.
either.
And so I would have to look more closely at that. It might be that they ask you to identify, do you have those students in your population who will benefit from these funds? Which
These
is,
questions
because
seem to-
it's CTE funds is what it is.
Yeah.
And
What I
so-
really think happens, Nikki, is they ask you your percentage of EL students, that's part of their funding formula.
Got it.
And so you get 15,000 to do the CTE stuff.
All the, yeah.
But
kids.
because you have EL students, you get this multiplier of 1,500 on top.
Right, but it's all for the use of
Right,
CTE.
it's all going to CTE programs.
Okay, so there's not like
No.
I mean, it's about 10%, and it wasn't,
No.
you know, like a designated,
That's
we'll do additional programs.
Basically, our EL population is 10%.
Yeah,
But they're in all our programs. There's no Hispanic
yeah, I was hoping they
CTE
were.
programs.
Yeah,
No.
oh, okay.
That's where the number comes from. The $1,000 comes from that 10% of your kids are Hispanic, and so that adds to your formula.
All right, and,
And Mike spreads that money, by the way, out. He picks programs every year that he targets. to
there's
fix.
a list of these,
Right.
yeah, that
And he
he's.
rotates that
sending.
around, trying to take care of the needs of each program.
It's also specific, so Perkins is super, super particular in how they can be used. It has to be more like equipment and things that would be permanent as opposed to
Right.
consumable type materials. And they also have to have, they do like particular credential checks and things related to the pathway. So it's all very, very specific in how it can be used.
Perkins has been around for about 40 years. It's named after Carl Perkins, a
Yeah.
senator back in the day. And this is federal money that flows through the state.
Okay, so then when they listed like 6 teachers,
Yep.
6 or 7, and one I didn't know, so I'm trusting it's probably the new computer lab person. Oh, okay, and so then those are the ones who have the permission to spend the money, or who have the,
Mike meets with the group
uh-huh,
and they decide on needs. And he prioritizes whose need is the greatest and what do they have. Because he also has CTE incentive money.
right.
And he has district funds for those programs as well.
Oh, okay, so it's on the part about how, well, there's a part on agricultural technical stuff. It
Right.
comes to about 10 grand, and they talk about matching funds.
Yeah.
So then the
Okay.
district pulls 20.
That's a separate.
That's the second one?
That's the second one.
Oh, that's
so
That's
7,
the
you're right.
incentive.
So
Ag
6,
incentive
Yeah,
grant.
that's down further.
Yeah.
yeah, well, so that, but they run together and overlap, or no?
So it's basically with CTE, we have several different sources of funding. And so Mike and I work together to make sure we're kind of piecing them together and leveraging them the best that we can. So Ag Incentive Grant, which is the second one on this agenda,
Mhm.
is only for the ag program. Perkins and there's one other grant that's not on this agenda, are able to be used for all CTE. And so with the Ag Incentive Grant, it is by design at the state level more like teacher driven, and so there has to be a teacher doing the application and some of the reporting and things. But the other grants are principal led, and they all have individual requirements that have to be followed. And so we piece it together and get the most leverage we can out of those funds.
And sometimes things are partially paid from Perkins and partially paid on the CTE
Yes,
grant.
especially with,
Incentive.
Okay, that's,
especially with
alright.
the Ag Incentive Grant, because one of its requirements is some very particular matching requirements that certain areas of the budget, not only do you have to do like a general dollar match, you have to do an actual line item match, where you literally say, I'm spending 50% of the dollars out of this grant, and I have to use
Okay.
another source for the other 50%. So there's oftentimes when we're doing purchase orders where we are piecing it together from multiple of the grants.
Oh, okay, and, because that, I've seen that stuff, and it didn't make sense when I started to study.
Like you may
this
see
field.
references to the same types of equipment or purchases in multiple of the grants, and it's because we would be using multiple
chunk from
funding
each one.
sources and putting it together to make a
Oh,
purchase.
okay. And so if there are two, like in this case, there are 2 teachers that do the ag stuff, and so both of them end up with a chunk, or they need to come together and
They work
spend
with,
together?
I think they work with Mike to
Is that
set
what
the
it is?
budget. So it has, like, part of the application itself has a budget where it says, how much will you use for supplies? How much will you use for professional development? Things like that. And so they set that at the school level, and we just, at the district office, kind of try and stay in touch with them throughout the year to ensure as we're making purchases that we're fitting it into the right categories.
One of the things I would encourage the board to do next year is to have a board meeting where you have the CTE teachers at their room here at the high school, and you go to their room and they show you what they do in their program. You're gonna see some phenomenal things. And I'm just gonna pick on, I'm looking at it, so I'll pick on Becky's room, for example. There is a giant plasma cutter in there. And I know it's not blood plasma.
No, I learned
It's-
that, okay, it's plastic.
But it's a plasma cutter. There is a new machine that shapes and bends metal that is phenomenal.
Okay.
You'll find in there a specialty welder. There's MIGs and TIG welders. The reason those are there is because we went to Metal Effects and found out, oh, you guys do this kind of welding? We don't have one. Oh,
Yeah.
we want our kids to do that.
That's a
So-
huge part of the focus with CTE now is
Mhm.
articulating with the
Prep them
local
for work.
industry.
Yeah.
Mike's replacement for Suzanne Kidwell is very technologically oriented, coding, all those kind of things. And so she's gonna take us to a different level in the computer experience. Suzanne Kidwell had a lot of the traditional business experience. This person comes, she can do the business part, but her experience has been very computer oriented. And so those are things that kids need to have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then so my last question for all of this is, there's professional development, and it seems like money comes from this grant to pay for that, okay? Does that save the district money? Does the district split those costs, or what I mean, obviously it saves the district money if they take it from here, but
Professional development is one of the ones where we have to do a line item match. So
Mhm.
typically, if somebody's going to a conference or something, 50% will come out of the Ag Incentive Grant, and then one of our other funding sources will pick up the other 50%.
okay, then this is sort of like any other budget. Let's just see that, you know, the materials for welding, so to speak, are extremely expensive.
Yeah.
So, okay, then the amount budgeted at one time, pretend it's $15 here and 10 there. And then you realize, well, I need 20 over here, that only leaves you 5. And you make those adjustments, or is it kind of like, no, do it next year and we'll see?
So
It's shiftable, right?
We've had, yeah, it's shiftable. Like throughout the year, if we do an assessment of where we're at with expenses and such, and we see we've maybe overdone it with one funding source, but we have funds available in the other, and it meets those requirements,
Uh-huh.
we can do journal entries. And
Oh,
so that's a
okay.
huge part of like the closing process, is really fine tuning and making sure everything lands exactly where we ultimately want it to be.
Oh, okay,
The most important thing to know is Perkins and the incentive grant,
yeah.
they aren't funding CTE. Okay, the district's general fund is funding CTE.
Oh, okay.
These make up, I don't know,
It's they're the
I-
supplies and
they
things like
might
that.
make up 10% of what we spend on CTE.
Our labor costs ultimately are the highest
Right.
component of the expense,
But-
and we do that in our supplemental concentration grant.
Both of these grants together couldn't fund Brian's program.
Well, I was putting that together,
Yeah,
and I was
there's no
thinking,
way.
so then the program isn't gonna lose just because,
Yeah.
let's say this gets cut.
These are just other mechanisms to try and augment.
Additional.
Yeah. We
Okay.
have also,
Okay.
there's a
We'd be
much bigger.
Foolish to just let this money go by.
Well, naturally, but I wouldn't like us to be dependent because I couldn't seem to realize if it, you know, like a lot of things, oh, we're giving you this money, so we're not giving you that, you
No.
know? And
No,
We
I
We
don't
do-
count on Perkins and this to run CTE.
Oh,
We
okay,
do
or
have a
anything.
change.
It's nice to do stuff for us.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
There is a bigger grant that is the CTE Incentive Grant,
Yeah.
and that has been a big driver on some of the big purchases we've been able to do. It over the years has fluctuated, but the last couple years I think it's been running about $50,000. So we have been getting that pretty consistently, and that's a big part of how we're funding CTE. We also were very fortunate for a few years. We used to do the ROP arrangement with MCOE, and they had some leftover funds when that program ended, and they set it up to where we would have a 3-year budget basically for supplies. So it was about $10,000 a year, And this year is the last year for that. So that's also been helping us with things like you mentioned. We've really increased the number of students participating in welding, for instance. So like the metal, the gas, those things. We've been able to also tap into that funding from MCOE. That is going away. So Mike and I have already talked about that, and you know, it's on his radar to make sure that he factors it into his school budget if we know that that funding will be off the table.
So another thing is that you have to realize is that the focus is to get as many CTE endorsed teachers as we can. The more we have who are CTE endorsed, the more funds we'll be able to garner.
Oh, I didn't.
For example, if we add a career pathway, Mike is working, Carolyn Bakewell just became CTE endorsed. We're trying to get our drama teacher and our music teacher are working on their CTE endorsements. If they do, we very well might use Perkins because it's generally a capital outlay investment. We might use that with bond money to help fix the stage with lighting and sound. Because we have a 1960 stage that has fluorescent bulbs that pop and snap when you turn them on, and it's a nightmare
And a
stage.
new curtain, I understand that's quite an issue of
Yeah.
concern too.
That's an example of if we're CTE endorsed in those programs, we have other sources of funding to try and help fix that. And our bond would be the match that we could use for those Perkins grants. But we have a cool auditorium. It's just really cool. But it's a mystery when you flip the switches on, what's gonna happen.
What happens, yeah.
And we can fix that. In today's world, there are LED bulbs, and it isn't a question of do we have enough power. We have tons of power. It's just transferring over to LED bulbs and a controller for the light system. And we're not trying to put Broadway in, but we just want to have, if we're going to have drama, which is one of my, COVID killed us this year because we were set to have fall play and spring play. And that's one of my big disappointments. We didn't get to do those because of COVID, but those are important. The theater's named after somebody who used to do that here. We need to bring that back. Being up on stage, interacting with other people is a life skill.
Yeah.
And so drama's a huge thing to put back. We hired our English teacher specifically because he has drama skills too. And he has the passion to do it.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, finish,
Well,
Paula.
it's just, I'm done with that one, but I have a question about number 4, so go, or unless,
Oh, but this is about the incentive grant, real quick, and I don't know if it's an omission, but on 12E, I think it's the 6th page, there's some boxes there.
Yeah.
Anyways, in regards to retention, it says number of students from the 2017 freshman cohort who completed 3 or 4 years of ag courses, essentially. And the box is empty. Did we not have any? Do we know why? Is that because of the number of ag courses we offer?
There were 3 issues. They weren't guided there from guidance, and this was in 17, so this was at the end of my first year. They weren't guided to take those courses to get the endorsement. We really didn't have the pathways set up the way they needed to be. They weren't coded even correctly in areas. And we didn't have as many pathways. So what happened was, Mike and I met and we talked about how are we gonna fix this? Well, one of the fixes was we put in a trimester schedule. Those kids at 16, 17 didn't have that. So now they had opportunities to get it. Now we also gave our counselors the focus of, when you see a kid who's taken construction and woodworking, you make sure they get in Brian's top class, the advanced class, so they can meet that pathway requirement of beginning, medium, and top end class. We make that a focus now. It became a targeted focus for us. The schedule was conducive, the funding was conducive to it. And so, you know, as a school, you always have to have a marquee of something, you know. one of our marquees is you can go to any 400 kid high school around. You probably will not find one that has as much CTE offering as we have. Remember, we've put a lot of stuff back in place in these facilities to make that happen. And so, yeah, we literally did not have anybody, we had tons of kids who had 2 of the 3 courses, but then kids were making decisions about, well, I want to be in AP something, so I can't be in advanced construction. We got past that with the schedule. And so now that became the focus. But the good news is we had all the right people in place to do it. We had a schedule in place to do it, and it became a focus. It was the whole rationale with Sanhedrin, how we transformed Sanhedrin into a vocational alternative ed where you get your 180 minimum and vocational. And Robert, you and I were together your first year. In your first year, my predecessor left you with no assistant, Mike is a new dean, and the counselors struggling to get things going. We weren't staffed where we needed to be. And so, I mean, you were the Sanhedrin principal, the high school principal, and you had a brand new dean. That was the administrative setup for our entire
And the independent study.
Oh, independent study principal,
Yes,
yeah,
okay.
because you had New Horizons back then. Because think about since then, New Horizons now part of the high school. They actually get their diploma through Sanhedrin. So New Horizons is not there. Sanhedrin has its own administration. The high school now has a principal and an assistant principal, and the focus with a trimester schedule. It just completely flipped around. But yeah, you're right, the answer is 0, because
Okay. Okay. I was curious, thank you.
yeah, that's why Mike and I had the conversation. Look at this welding place we have, look at this shop we have, how do we not get endorsements?
Yeah, that was my question, because
Yeah,
I know
it
we've
wasn't-
expanded our CTE program,
Right,
and it's just curious, but.
yeah, you had the facility, you had the teachers, we just didn't have scheduling people to get it done.
Okay, my only other thing is, number 4 talks about a night custodian. Sorry, have to get rid of those, thank you. Anyway, the Bechtel Grove Middle School, Brookside Elementary School, and it's a full-time night custodian equivalent. Okay, so what I'm wondering about is that the high school is still shy a night custodian. And I figured that since Bechtel no longer has the night custodian that they had, there may or may not be a shift around. And I had my dates off. You were real right about their day custodian also deciding not to be there anymore, well, retiring. And
Yeah.
so the night custodian for Bechtel Grove, it looks like and Brookside, or are you talking about 2 custodians? Because you figure the night custodian at Brookside will switch, or, this is
It's
just real
one
strange to
position.
me.
I think it's just
One-
one
it's
position.
Well,
one
it seemed to be one position, but you plan to split them at 2 schools and then hire 2 more custodians, or 3?
Well,
No.
right now, what we're doing, what we've been doing all year long,
Yeah.
is patching people together the best we
Exactly.
can.
Yeah,
And so, next year, we need to be back to normal, where we have a day and night custodian. The high school has a day custodian and 2 night people, because they have so many activities, and it's
Yeah.
the biggest
it's
space.
crazy.
Brookside and Blosser and Bechtel should have a day and a night person. And we're gonna have some movement. I know Melanie
She's
wants to
gonna
go to the
ask,
middle
yeah,
school,
Yeah.
and so we're gonna need a different daytime person here. And
And I
so,
think Trina has some stuff posted.
right,
I mean, mainly, I think the issue is that we've had difficulty recruiting.
I really hope that this unemployment runs out quickly, so
No,
we
we
can
don't.
get people hired. We need
No.
people who want jobs.
Well, we maybe need to consider posting them where people go to look for jobs. I know that there was stuff on EdJoin, but a lot of people who are particularly interested in, often jobs such as these don't use EdJoin near as much
Oh,
as
yeah.
they use radios or whatever else to be notified.
Do we
Also-
post things through the EDD?
Well, I asked that last time and I
Yeah,
understood they
and
were going to.
I know that Trina did that.
Okay, and then the other part of that problem, which fits my thinking on unemployment, is that the faster we fix those salary schedules, the faster you'll have a chance at interesting someone in starting a job there. Even at $15 an hour, you don't break your back at Taco Bell, you know, and
I know.
it's difficult. I know that you can't
We
do it
had to
alone,
make the
but,
adjustment to $15. We had no choice. The
and
state
I'm really
imposed
glad
it.
to hear that. I just figured that, well, we know what I figured, that it should have gone down the line.
I know.
But that's a real big deal. But okay, so at this point, basically we have 4.5 custodians, or is
Oh,
5.5,
we have a
I
lot more
guess.
than 4.5, right?
Do we?
Yeah.
We should have 2 at Blosser right now, and then there's 2 here,
There's 2 at Brookside, 2 at Blosser, 2 at Brookside.
6.5 then?
Yeah.
Because, and we had another employee that was working 4 hours for the custodial staff.
Yep.
He's still here,
Yep.
so it's 6.5 employees?
We're missing,
7, I guess we're missing, well, at least 2.5.
we're missing 2.5.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're short 1 maintenance person also,
To go to 5, right?
to go to 4. They have a director and then 4
Mhm.
don't do that.
I'm not doing it. I never blink, I never do anything.
We have
Okay.
4 maintenance guys,
Mm.
and then we only have 3 right now. I would love to have 4 because it would help us greatly. And so we have 4 maintenance, we only have 3, and we're 2.5 short on custodian. The good news is we have summer where we're not having to have the day and night scenario.
No, that's
happen.
real handy.
But
and
we've
some
got
of
to
the
get them
cleaning.
hired.
Yeah.
Just a note, so, I mean, I have to double check, but I don't believe budget-wise that we're budgeted for 2.5 vacancies.
Well,
Or 3.
we have right now, we have
Budgeted for-
somebody retiring,
Okay,
and we've
so you're
never,
thinking about like things we have to fill as well?
we have to fill,
the
not,
only-
these aren't additionals.
Okay, the only thing that I had like added going into next year that wasn't already like in the budget was the 0.5, because we had somebody who picked up a 0.5 and that remaining 0.5 is still out there, so
To
that
get
is
back to
factored.
our normal, we have to fill a position at the high school, and we have to fill another custodial position. And we have a half where we used to have a hole. So we're 2.5 down from where we were pre-COVID.
So I just wanted people to know in terms of, you know,
Right.
if we add certain things, what's already factored in money-wise and what's.
That's why we've not had a conversation about
Yeah.
budget. This isn't a budgetary thing, it's a
No, I'm just filling
finding
those.
people thing.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other discussion on the consent agenda? Like a motion and a second to approve?
I'll move to approve consent agenda.
I'll second.
Motion and seconded. No further comments or discussion, so call for the vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We are now down to public hearing of the local control accountability plan. Board of Trustees of Willits Unified School District will hold a public hearing to receive input from the public on matters pertaining to the adoption of the 21-22 LCAP. The board welcomes public input. So if there is anybody out there in the gallery that wants to speak up on the LCAP, please chime in.
Before we go to public comment, let me just tell you a couple things. These are drafts. This is the update from, this is actually the 1920 update on the LCAP, because we had to update the LCAP from a year ago. The LCAP from last year is not going to be updated. It was handled with all those other plans we did in COVID. This is our new LCAP that we have, they're normally in 3-year windows. 80+% of it is tied up in personnel. So when you ask the question about CTE and funding, you'll find that the bulk of CTE high school teachers fall into the LCAP funding. We're using that supplemental concentration grant money to fund those CTE programs. So it's kind of an awkward thing, but the more students who qualify for free and reduced EL and foster, the more funds we get, the better job we can do in CTE. But when you look through it, you'll see that. I emailed everybody that. I have some printed ones if you want printed ones. But the LCAP is really part of our budget, but it is based on kids being what they call unduplicated. So unduplicated means if I'm EL, low income, and I'm a foster child, I'm not 3, I'm still 1. And so we tend to be around 70% is our normal number. And that number fluctuates.
It definitely fell. Data collection was extremely challenging during COVID.
Yeah.
We're actually, tech department is putting in place a new online data collection software that we'll be able to use coming into next year. So we're hoping to boost that number up a bit.
Our reality number is 70. Getting the number 70 documented is going to be tough because one of the bigger factors that happened was we have the CEP program for food service. I don't use the word free, I say they don't get charged for lunch. When you do that, one of the major ways you use to get your number for this is anybody who qualified for free and reduced lunch. Well, we're not required to do the free and reduced lunch application.
And so now there's less incentive tied to the application itself. Previously, families were incentivized to do the application because it got them the lunch benefit. Now that everyone is not being charged for lunch, it's more of a challenge to encourage folks to still fill out the form.
So the goal is to try and make sure we've been trying to put all together these plans to figure out how are we going to document this. Because the more we have, the more we get. Now, certainly I don't want kids to be low income or EL or foster place. That's not my goal, obviously. My goal, though, is everyone who is, let's use that to their advantage and our advantage to get as much funding as we can. That's the real purpose of it.
Do you guys task individuals or an individual with going out and making contact with parents to get that data?
At sites we're doing it. It's something that we'll get better at, but a lot of things happen. We jumped into the CEP food program before COVID, and so we knew we had a window of a few years to get it figured out. Well, then we had COVID, and COVID just annihilated all our free and reduced numbers because nobody was here to be either. And we were in CEP. So I think the district's got a good plan to get those numbers as close as we can.
Yeah, and Jen's piloting, so the software I was talking about, it's going to be incorporated into, there's like an annual renewal that parents have to do already for the various other forms and things for the beginning of the year. And that will now be incorporated into that, so it'll kind of be a one-stop shop for parents instead of yet another form externally, although we will have the availability of it to be in writing for folks who would prefer that, but we're going to try and...
So essentially the new system will be an online system where somebody can just log in,
yes,
fill out the form?
Or if they do submit it in writing, which is still allowable, it will be scanned into a system, so
Okay.
It'll be a lot more efficient.
So here's the craziness of funding in the state of California. I'll use EL as an example. EL, we get Title III money, which is focused on EL students. We have supplemental concentration. We have normal district money we spend on EL. We have 3 different COVID funds that specify using funds towards EL students. The same thing as low income. So literally, when there's an EL expense, Nikki and I are going, which category do we want to put this in? And we're doing it based on when does the fund expire? How much money is left in the fund? What are the rules for that fund?
Uses?
Yeah, so when we talk about things like EL funding and all those kind of things, there are like 6 different pots you go to that never mesh in time frame, in volume, in scope, or anything. And so it really, this LCAP is just one more example of the state gave us this much money, but you got to spend it this way in this time on these students. Well, you also have to mesh everything else together.
Should give us a premium program, though.
Well, there are places where we do very well. And when you look in LCAP, there are some really significant things. This is the place, for example, when I came here, in fact, when Alex mentioned some highlights, that I'm not going to take credit for the highlight, only that it was my idea. But what happened was, my first soccer game here, all the parents were outside. We use this money to help offset costs. So all the parents get into every event free. It's made a huge difference for kids. Games are full. You come to sporting events, and there's tons of, on Friday night here, especially if we happen to win a couple football games, it's a ghost town in town. There's a ton of people here. There are people meeting here. Friends are meeting up. Oh, hey, I haven't seen you in forever. Now what's happened is because we put the club stuff in place, the concession stand goes crazy because they're not paying to get in, so they got money to buy concessions. That helps the boosters. Now you'll see about 6 tables, and each club at the high school has stuff that they're hawking for people to buy or introducing. So all of the clubs have benefited. We spend 40 grand out of here and probably get 10 times that in perks with community. And so it's rare. We're one of the few schools who do it. I shamed St. Helena into doing it because their superintendent whined about not charging gate. And I told him he should be embarrassed to charge a gate. But we're one of the few schools who do that, and it makes a difference. So the LCAP has a lot of things that have always been there.
Yeah, there wasn't a ton that changed. I mean, we've been pretty consistent year over year with some of the main items in here.
But what you need to know is that it is a flexible document over the next 3 years, and you can make changes and adaptations to it. I put an SRO back in here, a student resource officer. Now, we may have that or we may not. We have money in here, $12,000 to purchase band equipment because we need additional band equipment. It might be 15, it might be 8. Hopefully, the summer gala will kick in again and we won't have to spend as much. But we've gone through 2 years now that normally is a major spike for the music program as summer gala. I mean, they put in significant amount of money into the district, 20,000 plus. We haven't had that. And so you'll see in here like $12,000 for the purchase of musical equipment. We live in a community where kids can't go buy a trombone. They're pricey. So we have to have a set of them to use. So everything in here is flexible and changeable. This is based on what I know today, what we've done in the past, and what will help us. And this is in conjunction with all those other funding sources we've talked about. This does not include all the stuff we've talked about with COVID money and ESSER money, title money, EL money, grant, CTE incentive. These are all different funding sources.
With the exception of, in the annual update, the LCP, so when you look at
Right.
2021, those were COVID funds because they asked us to do a report on that instead of on the
Right.
supplemental constitution.
This is a comprehensive look. We have 3 simple goals. but those goals have a lot of action plans that go with them, and we put dollar amounts to them. It's a rough estimate. Probably the closest dollar plans we have are the ones that are personnel,
Yeah.
because
It's all
Nikki
position
can calculate
control.
out what are they gonna cost 1, 2, 3 years from now. But some of the other ones are, you know, there's 40-some thousand in there for no admission. Well, we use no admission because, remember, not only did we used to charge to get in, we never bussed anybody to go any places. Parents were driving cars all the time. Well, we now have our bus drivers taking kids to games.
That doesn't get charged
No.
here, it's just in our transportation, but it's, yeah, it's like
Yeah.
officials, it's,
Yeah.
you know, miscellaneous things related to supporting athletics, buying the, varsity letters, or, you know,
Right.
things like that.
So site councils give me input, teachers give me input, building principals give me input. I asked Rotary people, I asked what do you think we ought to do, what are you kind of things? I did a parent survey. And to let you know, the parent survey I did, that I helped use in LCAP, was really interesting. The top 4 goals, number 1 was get back to normal. Do what you've done before, we want to get back to normal. Number 2 was to deal with social emotional issues that kids have. That was number 2, and not even a close number, that was an obvious number 2. And that's what we did in our COVID plan, when we talked about using $130,000 to use Mendocino Youth Project to talk about therapists and all that stuff. That was a major issue. Number 3 for them was dealing with learning loss for kids. Right next to it, literally 1 percentage point behind, was CTE for students. That was a almost tie for 3. It was 1 point different. And that was from a very representative group of parents from every grade level, from every building. And sure, I'd like to have 100% participation, but our representation on that survey was really good. And those 4 goals were not just kind of the top, they were like compared to everything else. And so parents sent a clear message in that. Let's get back to normal. Kids got problems, let's help them. We want kids to have CTE stuff. And if kids are struggling through COVID, learning loss, we need to help them. The goals were just blatantly obvious.
So did we get people who can do therapy type things? Have we
Yes.
got those social worker types?
We will have a contract coming this week from Mendocino Youth Project.
Oh, okay.
And they have access to all those therapists, all those people. We have, what's Clavon's first name? Orly Clavon is who you saw over today at Sanhedrin. She works for Mendocino Youth Project. And so they have all those therapists, all those people they have access to, virtually whatever your problem is. If you have alcoholism at home, if you're dealing with a suicide, all those things, they have all those specialists that we're going to commit to $130,000 in services with them. It may have to be 150, so something in LCAP's gonna change, or something in COVID money will change. But clearly, that has to happen.
But the district is gonna contract to them and they're gonna send out the people
They're gonna send them on campus.
to us, to
Yeah.
the district?
Because we don't have people who have those skills. And we don't know how to keep them fully employed otherwise. And so we're going to use their expertise to do that. We have school counselors, but we don't
They're
have
not trained in
We don't have grief therapists. We don't have counselors who help kids through divorce.
Yeah.
We don't have, kids who lose a parent.
Well, the counselors in the district are academic, right?
They're academic counselors.
We have 1 MFT counselor.
Right.
At the middle school or?
No,
Elementary level.
Jeff Kramer.
Oh, Jeff, oh, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
But that's what this is. This is another piece of that puzzle of COVID money, grant incentive, all those other things. This includes other things that aren't able to be in those grants. And then on top of that, we have our normal unrestricted general fund, which just gets, should be the bulk of it instead of all of this, but it isn't. If they took all this and put it into general fund, we wouldn't have 12 plans to sort through. We'd have one set of goals and be focused on the goals. Yeah.
Local control.
Yeah.
So are we done with the public hearing? Anything from the gallery with respect to the public hearing on the local control accountability plan?
Yes, this is Amy Brooms. I have a question. How does a person join the LCAP meetings that's new, or how are we notified about LCAP meetings that are upcoming?
Well, in COVID world, virtually everything was done by either a Zoom or a site council meeting or just through surveying. The normal process prior to this has been every site council gets attended by myself. We have teacher meetings. Everybody I get information from, whether it's WTA, CSEA, admins, all of that information, a survey with parents, all of that goes into LCAP. It's not just a LCAP in particular meeting that changes this document. It's all of those things together. It wants all stakeholders to get an input. So every superintendent has kind of their own process. I would guess that Joe's done it differently in his district because his district's super small and K-8. They probably have a much better participation rate because they tend to have that in the early hours.
Okay, so I understand there's site council meetings at each site that are kind of separate. Actually, they are separate than LCAP. So how does a person join an LCAP meeting on the monthly basis, so the every 2 month or the quarter basis that you meet to talk about items? How does a person join that?
Well, if they let me know that they want to be part of them, I'd be glad to add them in. But for what also, I'm trying to use existing meetings for a lot of it. For example, the PTOs, I meet with them. I meet with Fossey at Sherwood. And we talk about, we don't really talk as much about LCAP as we talk about what are the things we need to do to improve what we're doing. So a lot of the LCAP conversation isn't about LCAP because it's just one of the pieces of funding. It's not the only way we make improvements. It's a funding source to do some of the improvements, but it's not the only thing that's out there.
And I would also expect that, I mean, if we have a new superintendent coming in, like you mentioned, we don't know yet what that person's process will look like. So we may need to wait and find out as we move forward what that person plans to do.
If I relied just on LCAP meetings, you would get a very limited number of people because it would tend to be only employee based and not really stakeholder based. This is really more input should come from parents and community and students than employees because they have a lot of avenue for input.
So, okay, because I was hoping that, I have been to an LCAP meeting in the past, but it's been years ago when we were talking about the K-5, 2 schools, 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, and there was parents and employees and everything, and I was under the assumption that parents, employees, stakeholders were all invited to monthly or quarterly meetings regarding the LCAP, which was a piece of it, and then you took also information from the site council meetings, and then that's the way that this LCAP was decided on. I have not heard of another LCAP meeting since I went to that last one 3 years ago, and maybe they've happened, but it'd be great if it was something that happened on a quarterly basis, or I know it's a 3-year plan, but maybe a suggestion that we could do something like that and include our site council or parents, stakeholders, and have actual meetings.
Yeah, and that's probably gonna be possible in a non-COVID world, but we've been pretty bombarded with other things that have been going on. And so, yeah, that's a process that every superintendent does it in certain ways. And the issue really, the goal of LCAP is to get as many stakeholders, which they translate as not employees, they translate that as parents, students, community, get their input. It's their school. And so, I get tons of input from teachers and CSEA and all kinds of folks that is factored into this.
Amy, Joe sent out an email to the staff, I think it was yesterday, basically saying that when he was going to be starting, and if anybody wanted to meet with him to arrange. I think Rochelle is keeping his calendar as to when he's going to meet with whoever wants to meet with him. So if you are real interested in this, then you should probably let Rochelle know that you'd like a meeting with Joe, and you can give him input as to what you'd like to see as far as your involvement in that goes.
We'll definitely do that. Thank you. I hope to join that, and I hope that more are involved in that process. Thank you.
Any other comments from the gallery with respect to the LCAP? Hearing none, we'll close the public hearing. We'll open the public hearing on, hold a public hearing to receive input from the public on matters pertaining to the adoption of the 21-22 budget.
Now, this is the exciting part of the meeting.
So, as Mark mentioned, minor miracle, getting this here. We've talked before about attempting to, get this stuff out sooner, and it feels like no matter how much I throw at this, the state throws back more. This has been an interesting one, as Mark mentioned. There has been a tremendous addition of particular funding sources, not just in volume of dollars, but locations within the budget, as well as additional planning documents that we've had to do throughout this year, reporting related to COVID funds. So it's been a real challenge. Right now, what I have available for you all is the estimated actuals and the 21-22 budget. And I will be bringing the multi-year projection and the criterion standards to the next meeting, but it will come out with the packet on Friday. So that will be with the agenda packet for next week.
And before you get there, realize the multi-year projection is an absolute roll of the dice right now. It's what we know now.
For the third year, or you're talking second also?
Third year.
Well, the third is over.
The third years are normally a roll of the dice, but it's what we know now. The second year is going to be a little bit more confusing than normal with still COVID ESSER funds rolling through it. But I just don't want you to look at the third year and go, oh my God, we're deficit spending like crazy again. Well, we don't know anything yet. So that's always kind of a wild card. But this year more so than normal. The second year is a guess right now. It's an educated guess, but it's a guess. What we know is the end of this year. And what we know is what we think we'll have available for next year. That's what we know really right now.
Well, we haven't had a third year that was correct in probably forever.
Well,
You should never, right? Like
Well,
you
exactly,
should be taking
that's-
it and then using
and so
that
it
to
should
inform
be-
your decision.
Yeah,
Of
I
course.
think all of us know that, so it's kind of like,
So Nikki, I mentioned this to you, something I'd like to see is that we have, I know it's extra work on your part, but that we have a multi-year projection without all the extra monies in it, so
Right.
all the extra COVID monies in it, so we can see what our real financial condition is.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things that Mark and I talked about with that is, I mean, just automatically, when you take those funds out, it throws the whole thing into deficit, right? Because we are using those funds for various expenditures. And if we were to be in a situation where we did not have those funds, we would have to make decisions on those expenditures as to what would remain and what would not remain. So it will look really stark, and I mean, we know that, but it's still, I think, an important illustration for us to see really and truly like how much the COVID funds have been part of the picture here. Now, the good news about the COVID funds and the way the state's been handling it, and the feds, there's obviously a lot we've not loved about it, which is the level of complication they've created with it and the very different pots that they're putting it in, the different rules, the different timelines. I will say the positive aspect about those different timelines is something we talked about at the last meeting, which is it will allow us to map across 3 years and sustain some things across 3 years with those funds. We then will have to transition and make decisions moving forward, but it gets us a great start on some of these other programs that we talked about last time, like the reading and EL and those things. And so we will see all of that in the multi-year projection. What I'd like to go over is on the first page here, Form 01, and for those who are Zooming, I believe Rochelle has this screen shared for you. We will see that we do have a bit of an increase in our LCFF funding going into next year is what we're anticipating. The state currently, what is proposed at the state level is that they will be doing a COLA next year, and they are also doing sort of like a second layer of COLA that is intended to make up for like not getting a COLA this year. And so that bumps that up next year. We'll look more at the multi-year projection when that comes next week, but what we need to be aware of on the other side of that is changes to our enrollment and then the implications of that to our funding. So right now, and going into next year, we have some buffer that happened because they held us harmless for our ADA collection. Our ADA enrollment is down a lot from where it previously had been, but we're not feeling a loss of revenue from that yet. And then as we move into next year, we're allowed to do what we always can do, which is they call it current or prior year. So whatever is more advantageous, you can use either the current or prior year's ADA. So that kind of stretches us out into next year where we get a little bit of a buffer. And then what we'll see in the third year is if our enrollment in ADA don't go back up, we will see a drop in revenue. Statewide enrollment is down. So
And that's why COLAs are probably going to happen.
right, because they have
They
their
have fewer
total
kids to
pot.
fund, so they have more money available,
Right.
so they're gonna act like, we're gonna give you COLA money. Well, that's because you have less kids.
Right.
We're not
That's
gonna
good.
change staffing because of that. We're staffed the exact same way. Because the kids don't all, like, it's not, you don't lose a group of third graders.
Yeah, it's spread throughout.
You lose
the
everybody from
districts.
every grade level, and it doesn't ever change our staffing.
Right. So right now, in terms of staffing, you know, there is a lot of changes that occurred in terms of locations within the budget because we tried to be strategic with use of COVID funds. There are, like the liaison at Bechtel Grove, the bilingual liaison is in the CSI funding, which is a particular grant that the Bechtel Grove is working with. We have added, I think we have allowed for the potential if in case our enrollment goes higher than we're anticipating, I think one extra FTE at the elementary level just in case. We have, as I mentioned earlier, anticipated hopefully filling that other 0.5 for the custodial, so that was something that we added in for next year. In terms of changes for estimated actuals this year from second interim, you know, I did make quite a lot of changes because at second interim, I still had a lot of unknowns about what the end of this year was going to look like and what costs were going to look like as we came back on campus. And so now we're at the end here, I know a lot more about that, and so there were things that changed. We had about $75,000 less. I reduced the category where we paid for things like coaches, substitute teachers, sort of non-positional certificated salaries. The athletics budgets, we have supplies for athletics and things like that, and I kind of left that in place through the year. We were hoping some would happen, and some did, but obviously not like anything normal like we would in a normal year. So reduction there. We had been budgeted for the financial advisor related to our bond work in our general fund. And if our bond had not passed, that would have been an expense we would need to recognize in the general fund. But now that is allowable to be charged to the bond, so we do not need to keep that in the general fund. We also were able to bring in a little bit of extra indirect cost from some of the COVID funding. Most of them do not allow for indirect costs, but there were a couple that did, so we were able to bring about $35,000 into the unrestricted general fund from that. We are closing the gap a little bit with food service. I reduced the contribution there by about $73,000 for current year. And then,
Excuse me, so that makes it about 700,000 in the whole?
no,
We were
for food
800,000.
service, no.
No,
Food
we're
service
not,
is like
we're not that far.
four
okay.
something, I think.
Yeah, we're 4 something.
We stayed
It was
at
closer
4.
to 5, and it
Yeah.
became
Right.
close. It's
Oh, I
down.
We thought we were gonna be 500 and we're 430-ish.
Yeah. And that's
Oh,
still,
okay.
I'll be honest, that's
So that's
still
large.
a really tough
Mhm.
area of the budget to predict. I'm hoping at closing that we close that gap even more. But where we are in the year and the sort of inherent lag in claiming the revenues, it's very hard for me to know ultimately what our revenue is gonna be. They did put in place some additional efforts to capture more revenue, so it was things like, making meals available over some of the breaks, like spring break,
Yeah.
and ramping up for like the weekend meals and some other things. So I did see that the last couple of claims were starting to trend up a bit, which is great, but it's just hard to predict what the last several months of the year will
But
look
we're
like.
still, the district is still kind of on the plan that within a couple of years, given the cooking and the arranging of the.
My goal is, based on the plan we put together, we should go to about 200 from 400.
Okay.
We're still gonna, virtually every district I know of supplements food service. It never pays for itself.
Right, but I thought it was closer to like a $60,000 or $80,000
Oh, no, it's
deficit
gonna be a
instead of the
200.
hundreds.
It'll probably be 200.
Well, our district is,
Yeah.
but we're working towards still
We're
getting
still
back
trying
to
to
kind of the.
bring that
All
down.
those plans we put together about bidding,
Yeah,
going to 2 production kitchens,
yeah, getting the
being
big
more
pots, getting the
efficient.
grant. Yeah.
And
And
then
so we'll get better. I'm hoping they're at the $200,000 range instead.
the other thing that we'll see sort of over probably a couple year window is once that's operating in that way, we'll have a better sense of like how many staff need to be there, and we can let attrition take place. So I mean, I think our intention was not to lay people off, but as people move on or retire, things like that, to reassess whether we need to bring positions back or not. So hopefully over a several year window, we'll see additional savings related to that as well.
Well, I had just understood from the beginning, a couple of years ago, that we were, at that time, only 300,000 or 400,000, and the hope was to bring us less than 100 at least.
Right.
And I just,
Well, COVID
changed
Well,
has
that didn't
annihilated
help.
us.
Yeah, it changed things
Because
dramatically.
we continued to pay for everybody and their benefits, and the
Yeah.
amount of revenue we got back in was 20% of what
Yeah.
we normally.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
understood that, I just.
so many efforts to
we're
do the
so
outreach,
hopeful.
like delivery of meals and all
Yeah.
of these things, and our participation rates still were just low,
Oh,
you know?
But we have a better menu, we
Mm-hmm.
have kettle cookers, we're bidding stuff out. We're gonna be doing 2 production kitchens instead of 4. And so we're putting things into place to make food service more productive or more efficient.
And so those food trucks, so to speak, that keep things warm and all the rest of that, they were covered by grants or they were covered by the?
A little of both.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, their
So-
box truck that they carry them in
Yeah.
is one I got for the district that we use.
But the carts
Maintenance and
themselves
use them.
were, I think, from.
But the
a grant.
carts were done, the kettle cooker was through a grant.
Yeah, I knew that the
Yeah,
kids.
so we did a combination of grants and some district funds to get the right vehicle to take them around. And
So what's bidding out then? I mean, you're gonna
bidding
go
out means
catering?
that you go into a bidding
Just for the food vendor.
for the food.
Oh, for the vendor, okay, all I
Yeah,
could
not
think of
for
was,
service.
we're gonna expand and
No,
become
no, no.
the latest in
Lake
caterers.
County,
Okay.
Lake County's food service directors get together and do a single bid.
Oh,
So when they bid, they're bidding the entire Lake County school. And we're going to get into that bid process. We're gonna join their bid.
oh, okay.
And so the more people you get bidding at Cisco,
Oh, yeah.
the cheaper
less
price they're
yeah.
going to give you. And so now we're in that. We've never been bidding like that before. So we'll get a better price. Probably one of the things in food service that helped the price, literally our milk price is cut in half. And we hand out a lot of milks every day.
Yeah, it has a potential for significant savings.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, and I just would imagine we could also maybe get a little better at estimating how many meals we need, given how many people
Right.
are gonna come by.
Yeah, I'm hoping
That's
too,
nifty.
as we sort of hopefully settle into a new normal, to be able to get into a position where I can do better budgeting for it. We have not had a normal food service year, I don't think since I've been here, because we had made the transition to CEP, that kind of threw everything up in the air and made it so I had no historical data to look back on. And then right when we would have kind of gotten into that mode, we had some issues with the audit stuff, and then we had COVID, so it's like, I don't have good, you wanna have a couple years of patterns to look
Yeah.
at, and it's really tough because we don't have good patterns to use as a basis, so I'm doing my very best, but I'm remaining conservative in that area of the budget because it's very up in the air.
Thanks.
So another change that happened this year, so for current year from second interim, we did see the LCFF revenue go up. That was almost entirely in supplemental concentration grant area of the revenue. And so when you get to, Rochelle, can we go down to this next page? It should be the one that's number 2 on this sheet. When we get down into the fund balance components, you'll see that we have quite a lot under what's called assigned fund balances, and about $500,000 of that is supplemental concentration grant. And so part of that is because we had this big jump late in the year of what they're telling us they anticipate to pay us for supplemental concentration grant. So that will carry over, but you'll see that it drops back down in next year, and it will continue to drop down in the multi-year projection because we're well budgeted in our supplemental concentration grant and using up all of the revenue they will be giving us and a little bit more. And as we see year over year, step and column increases and such, it will eat up more and more of that balance. And the other area that we had some assigned balance that was different from that second interim is transportation, which is normally a program we often end up putting a contribution in from the unrestricted general fund. This year, because we used virtually no fuel, and also had, we've now done a lot of replacement of vehicles. We don't have as much repair stuff going on. So there was about $90,000 surplus just in that fund, but those funds must be used for transportation. So they are assigned for that use for next year. And in next year's budget, they get used up plus a little more, and we're back into the mode of adding a little from the general fund.
Well, plus fuel prices are going up, so.
And that was, I did try to anticipate that.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're down a driver.
We can see that.
And so there's a lot of issues in transportation. This is not a year to use as a benchmark.
Yeah, and I believe we did factor in an extra driver when we
Yeah.
looked at next year's budget, because they're
Yeah.
definitely anticipating needing that
Yes.
when we're back to normal. Some other things that I would point out to you is that we talked at the last meeting about the board policy related to the reserves, and I realize it is not adopted yet, but I went ahead and incorporated it here because it doesn't change any expenditure of dollars. It's just, we can see what this looks like if we implement it this way. And so when you look at the reserve for economic uncertainties, this is 17% of general fund expenditures, excluding any expenditures from single source, one-time funds that exceed $250,000, which this year we had a lot of that because of COVID. And so, and we also have quite a bit of COVID in next year. So I wanted to let you know that we had like $379,000 from one of our COVID sources, $291,000 from another COVID source, 1.2 million from a third COVID source, and 519,000 in a fourth COVID source. So those were all excluded when I applied the 17%. In the 21-22 year, we have just 2 COVID sources that are excluded out of that calculation. It was 435,000 and just a little over $1 million, 1,060,000. So I will point this out again, I guess, when we get to that, but I realized after this got sent out, that policy that we're doing a first reading on, that part of the language got excluded, and I think we had talked about wanting to have that language. So that will be in for the second reading unless you guys direct me otherwise, but I think this shows us that puts us really, I think, on the right track. You can see that we do have a little tiny bit unappropriated after that balance. I think excluding these types of one-time expenditures is the right approach because it keeps us a lot more stable year over year, and it holds that reserve against our normal budget as opposed to allowing it to become sort of spiked when we have one-time purchases.
And that's kind of addressing Jeannie's thing about where are we really at without COVID.
Similar, exactly. It's a similar issue.
The other issue is, remember that a year ago this time, we were talking about getting massive deferments was the plan. So we unloaded a whole bunch of stuff that we've normally done to prepare for that. It didn't happen. So this budget reflects that that didn't happen. It also assumed that we were going to, we had no idea when we were coming back into school when you did your budget. Were we going to be back in November? Were we going to be back in January? We had no idea. So we had to leave all those budget line items in place. For example, fuel. I mean, we left diesel fuel in place. We had no idea when we were coming back. And if we did, we had to have the budget in place to do it. So this year's cleanup at the end of the year took in more dollars than it normally would do because we had to budget for, we budgeted for deferments that didn't happen. Then we had to budget for, so what happens if we function normally, if we come back in? That didn't happen until March. And so even in March, we didn't come back to normal. We came back to semi-normal. And so this year's cleanup of the budget brought more money back into a one-time scenario. And we got COVID money on top of it. So it's been a really unique year in budget land too. But the good news is we're in a good financial place. We have a plan to spend those COVID dollars. We had talked at our last meeting. We have a plan for those COVID dollars over the next 3 years of about $1 million each year to do reading services, EL services, the social emotional with Mendocino Youth Project. All those things are budgeted out for the next 3 years. So the COVID money is spoken for. It's just gonna go over the next 3 years. Next year, we should be back to normal. We should be buying diesel that's more than it should be. We should be sending buses. We should be having food service normal. So you have to realize that this year's budget is it's a figment of what went on. You know, we went from, oh, we're gonna have a disaster to revenue's not bad, to when are we coming back, who knows, so.
I did just think of another thing I wanted to point out. We did make a change in terms of how we budgeted some stuff related to Title I and Title II, and previously we had been using Title II in what was called class size reduction, so it was funding a component of an elementary teacher, and that has shifted back out to the unrestricted general fund, and we're bringing Title II kind of back to what I think is a more traditional use of Title II, which is focused more on professional development and things related to that. We put in place some budget related to discussions with the team working on EL. So the focus, as we talked about last week, was less on positions. So previously what we'd seen at like first and second interim is we looked in the multi-year and said, oh, we anticipate seeing some FTE related to bringing back EL positions. And as they discussed last time, the focus now is more on professional development. So
Right.
We're seeing potentially we'll bring in some like support and coaching type stuff, but also professional development expenses related to the teachers themselves. And so we have that in place in our Title III. It can be used in conjunction with Title II and Title I. And we also shifted some stuff that had previously been in Title I. And I think there's going to be some additional work that I will be doing moving forward when Joe comes in, where we really, as the whole reading plan gets firmed up, where that lands, where if it will land more, we have it a lot in COVID right now. Will it land more in Title I? Will it land more in COVID? We have the ability, I think, to support it either way, but it's going to be a matter of assessing what is the best strategy depending on all available uses of those funds and how can we maximize the use of them. So I do want to point out that we may see some changes related to that throughout the next
Historically, in the,
There's some questions on Zoom.
Yeah, okay.
So two from Brian. The first one says, so to be clear, 17% without COVID monies factored in? Question mark.
So I'm trying to think. It may incorporate a very small amount of COVID, Brian, because there, for instance, was one state pot of COVID funds that I think was only 86,000. So what we had talked about at the last meeting was when we talk about excluding something from that calculation, that we would do it single funding sources over $250,000. So there may be a small amount, but it would have a very negligible impact on the actual reserve for economic uncertainty.
Okay. And one more from Brian. It says, won't the COVID money and bond money continue to offset this budget?
COVID money will offset what we spend it on. Those positions, the biggest issue with that 3-year projection of spending $1 million for those programs, EL and reading and all that, is at the end of 3 years, were they successful? Do you continue them? Were they successful enough that you don't need to continue them? Do you change them? And if you do, what are you going to not do to continue to do those? Because you have $1 million sitting over these next 3 years in COVID funds that you're putting in these systemic improvements. And if they work, you won't need those services. If they don't work, you're gonna change to something else. So you kind of have to play that out over time of what are you going to keep and what are you not going to keep. Because without the COVID funds, those things aren't going to happen, or something else has to go. The issue with funding of those things is where do they fit in? What are going to be the new things? Every president comes in with a new plan. There was, No Child Left Behind. Obama was Race to the Top.
Yes, that's
Trump was ESSR. Over that time, they lost that concept of class size reduction that was in Bush's plan. Obama kept it for 2 years and until the Race to the Top came out. That's why we removed the teacher from there, because that's really not an appropriate expense of Title II.
It's still allowable,
It's
but
allowable.
it's really not what it's
It's
generally
designed for
geared
teacher professional development,
Right.
it's really what it's
Which
targeted.
we were previously doing that professional development in Title I, and we're shifting that back over, and we'll allow those Title I funds to be used in
Yeah.
other ways within Title I.
Yeah. This spike of COVID funds, you're fine through the next 3-year window. It's what do you do at that 4th year? What stays, what goes? Will funding increase from the state enough to support keeping those? Will you increase your wages at the same time? And if you do, that's a multiplying effect. So those are the big financial issues coming over the next couple of years. You have a plan for the COVID money, but what you don't have a plan for is what do you do when you don't? And did it work or did it not work?
And then I think he also had asked about bond within that question.
Oh,
And
yeah.
At this point, we, as you mentioned, we're carrying into 21-22 about $1 million of bond funds, but they're fairly well allocated if we implement the
spent.
Brookside project. And so that's not, the bond funds at moving forward now are not necessarily offsetting something in the general fund.
No,
So they're
the
kind of
quick
separate
answer to that
things.
is, are we spending less in maintenance because we have a bond?
No.
The answer is no. The answer is, we've continued to spend that in maintenance because we have so many things to fix. And that bond money is in addition to what we were spending. We never could keep up with it in our normal funds. The bond has allowed us to do long-term fixes that I want you guys to get to the point where preventative maintenance happens. Right now, we're fix and repair. We do very little preventative maintenance.
Yeah, I'd like to see us get to that point as well. It has become a pretty big focus within our liability insurance JPA. They have put a lot of new policies in place, and their expectations on districts are growing. They want to see a lot more, inspections of things prior to winter break. If you're going to be gone, they see a lot of damages happen because of leaking. Well, granted, hopefully leaking will not be a problem in our future now that we've fixed all of our roofs, but things like that. They're asking us to be more proactive, and so I also am really hoping that we can kind of turn that corner at some point and get into that preventative mode.
One last question. Where would a person see the budget of the COVID monies not shown in this budget?
Okay, so the stuff that we're looking at the moment is current year and 21-22. When we see the multi-year projection that will be at next week's meeting, that will incorporate at that point all known COVID funds, because the 23-24 is the final year of the multi-year projection, and that's where the last deadline for any expenditure of COVID funds sits. So we will see within that multi-year projection the use of all COVID funds. There will not be any that are not incorporated at that time.
And in the bond issue hasn't saved general fund really money. The place where we have saved money from normal year expenses, the district's not bought a bus in 5 years. You've got vans for students that we did through grants. That's where we've saved money, because traditionally, you have a schedule of purchasing buses. When I came, you had 2 that you were gonna purchase and you didn't. Well, we've replaced out 5 buses and a boatload of vans through grants and things. And the bond also has purchased a couple of vans. COVID money helped us purchase a special ed van for handicapped students, because we can't put as many people on a bus and we needed handicap, we got a handicap van. So the purchase of buses and vans and things has been greatly helped by COVID and grants, where normally that would have hit us in general fund.
The other thing I would say about, I guess, places to look at the COVID funds was we did the adoption of the ELO plan.
Right.
So that was one, and then we're still looking into details, but I'm hearing that the newest pot of COVID fund is called ESSER 3, and I think there may be a requirement for a particular template that we might need to use for that, so we'll get more details about that. I mean, again, all the dollars will be incorporated into our multi-year projection, but you know, those are additional documents that are related to the COVID fund.
The ELO plan we did at the last meeting,
Is it last or the one before?
I don't know, was it
Might
last
have
meeting?
been
They're all
May.
running together.
Yeah.
But
I know, I
the
have
ELO plan is where that $1 million gets separated out for the next 3 years. And that's where we talked about reading and EL and all those services, enhancing those. And so
Right.
that's the best representation of COVID funds.
Right, and there will, I mean, we know, for instance, ESSER 3 is our biggest pot of
Right.
COVID funds. So that $1 million won't necessarily map out every single use of it, but we know that that $1 million that will be the ELO funds, that transitions, it will be ESSER 2 funds will get used to pick that up and continue implementing those same set of expenditures in the second year of the multi-year projection. And then we anticipate using ESSER 3 in the third and final year to continue those things, as well as there will be, I think, some other facilities related projects we've talked about with the ESSER 3.
Right.
And yeah, so.
I don't know if I can be heard through the Zoom or not.
Yeah, we can hear you.
So I don't think my question was answered. I just want to know how it is that a person could, without going sifting through 1 million pots of different funding sources, find out where the money was actually spent on COVID or from COVID.
So the answer is there is no place, because the state has put them into different parts of the budget. So in terms of sifting, I mean, unfortunately, that is how we have to budget for, because they have put it and spread it out throughout the budget. And not only spread it out in locations throughout the budget, but spread it out in terms of deadlines throughout this year and the next 3 years. So there is no one cohesive plan that has every single COVID fund. The state has required, we did the learning continuity plan, when was that? At the beginning of this year, Mark?
Mm-hmm.
That was one plan, and you can see in the LCAP annual update, there is a section that addresses what our estimated actuals were. So it says, like, here's what we anticipated the use, and then at this time, what we are looking at for estimated actuals for those items. So that is in one place, that's in the annual update. We just adopted the ELO plan. That's a separate plan that the state has had us do. And as I said, there may be another one coming up. But that, I mean, unfortunately, that is the position the state has put us in. That is the way they have asked us to address it, is in these different chunks. So I don't have it all in one place.
Part of the answer to your question, Brian, is we haven't got all that funding. And so we have the ELO plan in place that we did last time, that we're hoping over the 3-year window, we're gonna get this ESSER 2 money and then ESSER 3 money they're gonna come with other plans, but that's where the money is going to, the COVID money's going to be spent. It's in those COVID plans specific to the ELO and then the ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 plans. But we don't even have those plans done yet. We just know the estimated amount that they tell us we're gonna get.
Which kind of brings me to, now, if I didn't misunderstand, you said that we had funding in 2021 that was from a COVID source.
Correct.
One of the amounts was $379,000, one 290,
Those are in current year.
right,
that
2021, that's
Yeah,
us
yeah.
right now, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, and then there was a 1.2 million and a $519,000, okay?
Correct.
Which comes to in around 3 million plus, okay? So, or it's about 3.8 if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, I mean, I could be. But, so those monies came from COVID sources, right?
Correct.
Okay, so how, if I didn't misunderstand Brian, what he's asking, and I would ask, so those monies came from COVID on 4 different pieces of paper? I mean, knock, knock, we're gonna give
They
you
are
this.
4 succinct places within the budget, correct. They have like their own budget.
Oh, okay, and so then they're put together to make their chunk of money, or they have to stay in their little
They
line?
have to stay in their own.
Lane, so to
Yes.
speak.
Yep.
So when
Because they
you,
all have different rules and timing.
on how to spend them, just like EL or
And
anybody else.
different timeframes within they have
Yeah.
to be spent.
Okay, so now that part I understand more clearly, each guy gets his own section.
Mhm.
So kind of the question might be, if I didn't misunderstand, is let's just pretend out of the $379,000 in line A, you wanted to buy whatever. Is there a list that shows from line A, or whatever, from this row, I took $200,000 to buy an anti-COVID truck, and that leaves me this much money? Is that,
So the list for the current year, the ones that I excluded from that calculation,
Mhm.
these are all either literally already spent. In fact, that 1.2 million, that had to be spent by December. So that
Right,
one's
and I
spent
don't mean-
done. But I mean, it's hard to put into words the breadth of items that accounts for. So, I mean, I don't have a single list that says
Oh, okay.
every single use
So,
because
can I jump in again?
it's, sure.
So if I had $100 and I gave it to my kid and said, go buy food, and he came back with $2, and he had a whole bunch of receipts, and a bunch of candy and cookies and whatever else, I'd say, well, what'd you spend all this money on? And he said, well, I can't really tell you because all the receipts are confusing to me. That would make me frustrated with my kid, right? I'm just asking, where do I look to see how the monies have been spent?
So I guess what I would say to you is, for instance, I have a report that has to go into the state. It's a quarterly report. I'm happy to provide a copy of it to you, but I believe that the way the state asks us to break it down would not provide as much clarity as you would think it would. I mean, they break it down into these sort of obscure categories, and that is the work that I have done on those dollars, which is to put it into the state's format. I'm happy to provide you a copy of that. I think it sounds like you would like a greater level of detail, and I am.
Right now we're looking at a budget that has 0 examples of how we spent COVID money. We've pulled all the COVID money out of
We've
the-
talked about these things at various other board meetings where when we've put these plans in place, and they are, as I mentioned, in the LCAP document is a chunk of them as well. So I mean, we have looked at them in many formats along the way. That's just one portion of the budget, so.
This ELO plan, for example, $1.17 million, it's almost exclusively COVID funds.
It is exclusively
It is.
COVID funds, correct.
Yeah. But if you're talking about this year's budget, Brian, you would have to look at multiple places. For example, We spent almost $150,000 on air purifiers. We spent a boatload of money on disinfecting and gloves. We bought tents. We paid for additional PD days for teachers. I mean, it's all over the place in the budget. It's virtually in 30 line items or more where we spent things. And I can give you a list of some of those.
In the budget we're looking at right now, though?
I didn't hear what that last one was.
Is it in this budget, set up that way? And no, not that I haven't found a.
It's not set up in the budget that way.
The
It's
budget-
spent in those line
My
items.
question is this, the things that you just listed, Mr. Westerberg,
Yep.
like the PPEs, everything you just listed, are any of those in this budget that we're looking at?
They are, in the sense that those dollars are in here, but I'm saying that the budget that we are required to review and adopt is not gonna give you that level of detail, because this document is a summary of all of our entire
Right.
budget.
But Brian, everything I mentioned is represented in the budget that Nikki put out there. All of those things are in there.
Each one goes
But it's
to a
not
different
listed.
It's not listed specifically as
They are all
COVID,
in
but
general funds.
all those expenses are line itemed out in the budget of expenses, and they were paid through COVID funding.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the discrepancy, though, in my understanding, the discrepancy is, at the beginning of this, it was said that all the monies over 250,000 were not included in the
Oh,
budget.
I'm sorry, okay, I think I understand, yeah.
Obviously, you,
Brian, I
And
think
I'll
I
keep
understand
it.
your question. So when we talked about that being excluded, what we mean is not excluded from the budget. We are saying that the way that we calculate the reserve for economic uncertainty is we take the total general fund expenditures and apply a percentage against it, 17%. But if you apply that percentage against the total expenditures and factor in things like the COVID funds, which are a pretty big single pot of one-time, well, not single pot, as we talked, many pots, but one-time funds, it can spike the reserve for economic uncertainty in a way that when you look at it year over year, you could kind of see the reserve kind of jumping up and down, because it's responding to the influence of these one-time funds. And I think that for our purposes of using the reserve, we want it to be a little bit more tied to our normal operating budget. And so what we talked about at the last meeting is that when we calculate that percentage, or apply the percentage against the expenditures, we will say we're not going to include those large one-time funds so as to prevent them from sort of artificially, swaying that reserve amount.
Here's a good way to understand it.
But the dollars themselves and them as an expenditure are incorporated in the budget.
Nikki excluded those one-time dollars from a fund balance percentage calculation. And the rationale is fairly simple, is that we're gonna have to spend that COVID money or we're not gonna get it or give it back. So it's really not money sitting in fund balance. So if we got $1 million in COVID money, and it would be excess reserve because we haven't spent it yet, but it's money that you have to spend or lose. So to add that into your fund balance calculation is really it's not correct, because you have to spend it or lose it.
Well, and
So that's what she's doing. This is about fund
I totally
balance.
agree with you.
Yep,
And it comes back to my original question,
yep.
which is, will the bond money and the COVID money offset the budget that we're sitting here looking at in the future? And the reality of it is it will, because you're gonna spend that money, just like you said, you have to spend the money,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not gonna spend it on lollipops, you're gonna spend it on things that the school needs, and it will be on things that we probably normally would have budgeted out of our normal budget. And so those monies will directly offset.
a lot of that is factored in already. So in terms of the bond, it is factored in. I don't anticipate any other offsets from the bond funds, the current issuance of bond funds, I should say. In regards to COVID, a lot of it is already factored in. So, for instance, we have the MFT position, which we have COVID funded that position. So it's already factored into our budget in that way. There are things that we have already done that offset, and you're seeing the offset here. I think where we'll see the areas where the offset has not yet shown up in the budget, I think is going to be the ESSER 3 pot of funds, which is the largest and the last one to come on board. And in fact, those funds are, the revenue for them is not in this budget only because they are federal funds and their accounting rules state that you don't recognize the revenue until you have spent the funds, and we don't anticipate spending them until the third year. And so when we look at the multi-year projection, we'll see a big jump in the revenue because we'll see that we're recognizing them. We'll see some expenditure planned out there. But that, I think that's the part that you're talking about, Brian, where what do we have to work with to like offset future things? It will be the ESSER 3. A lot of the rest of it is fairly well mapped out by these other plans that have happened already.
So to be clear, so let me just make sure I understand then. The money that is not in this budget, it's federal,
Yes.
will not be logged until 3 years out. And we all agreed that 3 years out is a make-believe number. At the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah.
And then separately, there is a whole bunch of money, anything over $250,000 that is not in this budget.
No, that's not correct. It's in the budget. It is in the budget.
It's
So
just,
how do we find out where the extra money that is COVID money is being spent into the future for the next 2 years?
So you're going to want to look at, so
make it a real budget.
going forward, it's the ELO plan is driving a huge chunk of it. So the ELO plan that was just adopted sets forth about $1 million worth of expenditures.
1.2.
And it is anticipated that the use of that will deplete that particular pot of funds. In fact, it is called the ELO grant. It's going to deplete that. But we intend to continue those actions into a second and third year, and we will use ESSER 2 funds in the second year to cover the cost, and then ESSER 3 funds in the third year to cover the cost. So that's well over $3 million across those 3 years to support that one, the execution of that plan over 3 years. So the ELO is going to show you a lot of the use of the funds. And then, as I mentioned, the ESSER 3, that's the chunk where I think we don't have everything budgeted out to particular uses. A little over $1 million is for the ELO implementation, but I believe the allocation it's $3 million or more. I don't remember the exact amount, but it's our biggest allocation for COVID, and that's where we don't have all of it mapped out. So that's why I'm saying that's the piece that we could potentially see some, use. We could use it to offset things that we don't have accounted for yet.
Yeah, the short answer is everything we've spent on COVID to date is in this budget. Everything we're talking about spending is going to be in those next COVID dollars, but those aren't dollars you want to add to, we're not adding them to fund balance because we're going to spend them.
We're not going to start programs that we can't fund past year 2, I get it.
What I can certainly do is, at the next meeting, I can easily identify, like when we look at the multi-year projection, which COVID funds are being booked as revenue in which years. And I think it would be easier to look at it that way than when we don't have that multi-year in front of us.
And just to be clear on the bond's not helping anything. The bond money's going to be gone by next June. Our first draw of $4 million will be gone.
Yeah.
we would have to do another draw because it'll all be spent by then.
There's a question.
Gotcha. But for instance, that bond, we've been holding extra money in the reserves for the past however many years, and you could fill me in more on that, but for the parking lot, right? So we could get our insurance for our parking lot. And the bond money has then taken care of that parking lot.
We have not had anything designated to that. What we have said is we need to ensure that we have a safe reserve because we know there are these looming projects, but we have not created.
That's semantics is what that is, though, because that's whenever we're talking about monies, we're saying we can't touch that money because we have to put in a $300,000 parking lot.
What I'm saying is that is one reason. What I'm saying is that is one reason to hold a safe reserve. For all of the reasons that we list to hold a sufficient reserve, those funds are only there once. If we were to actually list out all of the many reasons why you hold that reserve and every single one of them happened, our reserve would not have been enough to do all of those things.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I'm not targeting that concept. My point is that I'm giving you a point of reference that the bond already has offset monies that we had definitely planned and discussed, including in board meetings, the parking lot. My last question is, if I were to go out and buy a bunch of wood for the school, and I brought back my receipts, the school's gonna wanna see that receipt and how I spent that money if I want to be reimbursed. We've got things like vans and all kinds of stuff that was paid for by COVID money. All I'm asking for is, where do I see the receipts? So I know what we actually spent the money for.
I guess what I'm saying is, could I very easily print out a ledger? Sure, but it's not something that would.
That's great. I would love to see a ledger.
That's fine. I think what I'm saying to you is that without doing a lot of other summarizing into these categories, it's not easily looked at. And I have done an insane amount of reporting to the state on this stuff, but unfortunately, I really feel that the state's reports are not useful in that way. I mean, I would have liked it if they had approached it in that way, but unfortunately, the legwork I have already put into it is to satisfy their compliance requirements, and I don't particularly find those reports useful, but I'm happy to give those to you as well.
The long and the short is we're not using COVID funds to inflate what we have for a fund balance because they're gonna get spent.
Right.
And the fund balance is a product of having 2 months of cash on hand so you don't have to borrow. Our expenses are about $1.5 million a month. So you can take $3 million and say that's a fund balance that we have to stay within so we don't have to borrow money and we can make it through cash flow issues. So remember, the fund balance is not something that's a savings account. It's if we spend our money correctly like we have budgeted, at the end of the year, this is what should be left. So it's not a pot of gold. It's a fund that will either grow or shrink as our budget goes. We spend money that you would traditionally think is fund balance all the time when we have cash flow. So we spend that money back and forth. At the end of the year, this is what we hope to have left in the savings. So it's not a stagnant fund.
And Brian, I do want to be clear that in no way am I trying to not be transparent with you about these funds. I want you to know I believe that transparency is very important, and I'm trying to think about what is it that I have that I can give you that would provide clarity? What would I need to do in order to put it in a format that would make sense and be usable? I'm deeply overwhelmed, to be very honest with you, on the amount of work that COVID funds have added to the accounting. And so
Well,
I guess I just want you to understand that I will do my very best to think about how I can summarize this in a fashion that would be usable. It's just not something that I already have sitting in a format
I think I have
like
some
that.
ideas that can help you
Can
with
I
what to get.
add to that first homework?
Yeah,
So first of all, I want to be clear that I am not attacking you or in any way, shape, or form think that you're trying to hide money or anything like that. Nikki, that is not my intent tonight. But when you look at this budget I try to sit here and look at it as a layperson, right? I try to put a different hat on. And there's no COVID monies in there. There's no way of understanding those extra pots that are available and that will be spent by looking at this budget, right? And they do affect, they're not in a vacuum. They are definitely tied, just like Mark's.
Agree.
All
Yeah,
this-
because
all this-
we're trying to
everything's
be
absolutely
strategic.
tied together.
Right.
But we're only looking at one part, even though the reality is they are part of the budget. All those other monies that you're talking about will absolutely affect this budget. That's all
So-
I'm saying. I'm not trying to
And I think
pretend
that,
there's black voodoo magic going on.
and so I think that unfortunately, the reality is when you're dealing with the amount of money that we have in our total budget, I mean, you could say that about every part of the budget. I don't think it's possible to look at this budget that gets adopted and sent in this format. I mean, it has to aggregate within categories. So there's just no other way to report this volume of data. And so it's difficult within this document to pinpoint those types of things. And I think that's always true regardless of the funding that you're looking at. But I think that is one of the reasons why, despite our maybe challenge with trying to do all these additional plans that they've put on our plate, but that I think is why the state has required these additional plans, which is that they are intended to provide that additional clarity specific to the COVID fund. So it was like the learning continuity plan was a big chunk, and then the ELO plan is a big chunk, and we have other ones coming. So I think those documents probably do a better job of lining out the activities and categories of how those funds are planned to be used or have been used.
and I think I have a good idea to help Nikki with that, because I have a pretty good idea of what's went to COVID and what hasn't. And so I'll get with her and we'll put together a list of, these are the things I know we've done through COVID, and the list is gonna be pretty significant of things, so.
Well, I know that really helped me a lot too.
Yeah, because they
that's
come
a-
from all over the place. in
It
the
does,
budget.
and when I do the
Yeah,
math
it's
on these
scattered.
things, it says $5 million is in the reserve, but nearly 1.5 is from restricted that apparently we're in the hole for. That's page 3, I think that's kind of the end of this. And so it says we have 3.8, almost 3.9 million sitting in a end funding balance or a reserve. And so I look at that and I think, gosh.
That's
we-
actually probably not the view you want to be looking at for that purpose.
Do I want it from the day before?
Probably the second page.
I mean, the page.
Yeah, second page is
Oh,
probably.
okay, well, so, and that's,
This has to do, so when you're looking at page 1 and page 2, you're looking at revenues and expenditures.
exactly.
When you get over to page 3, now you're moving into your assets and liabilities, which means you're looking at,
Taking
it's like
away.
where you're dealing with the difference between reserve or fund balance and cash, right? They can be
And cash
different
flow,
at
well,
different.
see,
So the assets and liabilities are, yes, important in the sense that we know we have to maintain sufficient cash flow, but they're not gonna be the reference point for when you're deciding about what reserve level you want. That's gonna be page 2.
well, okay, and so that's what I thought. I was just trying to take everything away from it that I could. And what it seemed like was, okay, we're over here with an unassigned, unappropriate amount that theoretically comes from, though it's the reserve for economic uncertainties right above it. But what I'm trying to figure out is, okay, so I put those things together and they don't include COVID. And COVID's about another nearly $3 million. So what I don't want to do is look at it and say, holy cow, that's $6 million sitting in the reserve. I want to instead tell me that, no, there's only a little over 3 million and the other 3 is going to be spent on the list that Mark's going to bring us.
So that is I don't think there's a concern for that in terms of the COVID funds. So the COVID funds that we had for this year, the state funds, I think pretty much are used up.
Mhm.
The federal funds, which are the ones I mentioned, that we will only book the amount that we spend for the current year, that is already factored in. So none of it's falling into a fund balance. So the COVID funds, we're gonna see the revenue and the expenditure will zero each other out. It's not like we have more coming in and then it's falling out. But I think as Brian points out, that doesn't mean that we don't know that there's other money in the wings, you know, and that has to do with these accounting requirements. We are not allowed to book that as revenue
Until
yet.
it's
But
spent,
we
right?
need to be very aware that it exists and make sure that we have our plans in place for the use of them. And within the context of the multi-year projection, we will see all of it in the revenue because we know it has to be spent within that period of time, therefore it will show up as revenue in that window. So in terms of looking at this fund balance, I don't anticipate that these funds in the reserve will get used up to do COVID expenses.
Right, they should
Yeah.
have their own little chunk over
Yeah.
there on the side.
So, but what we have here is we have, you know, our unrestricted and restricted. And typically when we're focused on reserve, we're focused on the unrestricted because the restricted funds are literally tied to particular uses. So yes, they may be sitting in a fund balance, but they don't have a broad application of uses. They must be only used for what they are designated. And those are set by the funding agencies, not by ourselves.
Right.
So we typically are not as focused on that piece of it. Where we are more focused is on the unrestricted. And when we look at the total fund balance, then we have the components broken out underneath it. And the assignments, as I mentioned, a big chunk of that is supplemental concentration grant. So not designated yet how it will specifically be spent, but must be used for the implementation of supplemental concentration grant items, typically the things in our LCAP plan. And then we also have a little pot there that is lottery funds and MAW funds. Then we get into the reserve for economic uncertainty. That's the one that's generated by doing that 17% calculation. And then the last tiny bit, the unassigned, that's literally what's left after you deduct out the other three pieces. You deduct out the revolving fund, you deduct out the assignments, and you deduct out the reserve for economic uncertainty. That's what's unappropriated.
So that's kind of the money, that $239,455 and 59
That's sort of
cents.
unspoken for
Yeah.
in any fashion.
Exactly. And so were I a person who, I never negotiate in public, but were I a person to think of my future, I could say, well, gosh, out of all that money, I could probably get all my benefits paid for, or whatever, because it's the money that's unattached to anything and would certainly come up for discussion, not necessarily.
Not sure what you would do the second year
Yeah, I was
after
gonna
you
say,
made
but
that
that is
payment.
one-
Well, I trust more would show up, frankly,
Oh,
but
okay.
still, you know.
Unfortunately, you pay me not to trust that
That
will
is,
happen.
I know, well, I'm gonna help change that, no.
But ultimately,
Okay.
I mean, yes, that is the issue, is when you
That's
are
what I'm
looking
getting
at
at.
the reserve with that in mind, yes, I absolutely agree and acknowledge that when we look at a multi-year projection, we don't anticipate that every single thing will happen exactly like that.
Well,
We
no.
can't have it happen
No.
that way because things will change and we take corrective actions in order to actively make change
Exactly.
happen. But we do have to look with a little bit of a longer lens and say, if we commit to something, how do we sustain it over the long term? And the other thing I would say about an amount like $239,000 is that it can sound like a lot, and in the context of trying to predict our revenue, it can disappear so quickly. And I say that because of how the swings happen when every time we get a new calculator from the state, like we come in and, the governor has done his proposal and they've revamped all of their assumptions and they think about how much the COLA is gonna be and all of these things. And we update our newest, ADA projections and all of the relevant things that drive our revenue. And just like this time, from second interim to now, our revenue went up in LCFF $150,000. Granted, it was all in supplemental concentration, but it can just as easily go down, and we've had that happen too. So from like reporting period to reporting period, you can see rather large swings, which as a percentage of our total revenue maybe are not large, but they can appear large if you're thinking about $150,000. But in the scope of our budget, that can be gone by the next reporting period, and they can say, oh, actually, you're not gonna get that money. We thought that was the right calculation, but actually we've changed that. And this is a fundamental problem that the state education funding system has, which is that they expect us to go through an entire school year, and we don't actually know our real revenue for that year when you've already expended everything until the end of the year. Our ADA, the final count happens in April. At that point, all funds that you're committing for the year, you're pretty much done at that point. And you can see big changes with that. So to me, when I look at this feels like a balanced budget to me. This doesn't feel like we have like a huge excess. Now, I feel good about us putting in place a policy for the 17% because I believe it creates a lot of clarity. And as we move forward, we all know then what that bottom line means. And there's no question about that. And it does help you make those decisions.
And if you have one-time money, you have one-time expenses. So the analogy you gave about healthcare, if you use that healthcare analogy, you would say if the district got this one-time money this year, we could one-time pay for that expense.
Or this
One-time revenue has to have one-time expenses. Or you have to take one-time revenue and take only a portion of it and say we're going to use a portion of it over the next 3 years.
Well, yeah, and in my mind, that money could have done that. But nonetheless, my last question for all of this is, this does not include a 3 to 5% COLA for this coming year, right?
It does incorporate a COLA.
Oh, but
for the coming year, yes.
Oh, okay. Well,
yeah,
I didn't
in fact, I believe
yet.
it incorporates 2 layers of COLA. I mentioned they
Well,
are
you
trying-
mentioned
You're talking
2
about the
layers.
revenue side.
On the
Yeah,
revenue side. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, were you not talking about revenue?
I am talking
Okay.
about, I understood that you said at the beginning, yeah, there's talk of maybe a 2-tier, so to speak, COLA.
What this factors in for 21-22, 5.07%. What they're calling that is COLA and a COLA augmentation.
And
what
that's
they-
the whole thing?
That's the
COLA and
whole
the COLA
thing. This
augmentation?
particular
Okay.
worksheet I'm looking at does not break it down into the 2 layers, but it's like, I
That's
think,
okay.
3 and 2 or
Well, it's just
something.
there's information out that is talking about a 5% for the coming year.
That's,
And other information that says, oh, only count on 3. And I'm wondering what we're counting on in
yes, no,
this.
that's a really important thing to know, and
Okay,
this
thanks.
budget incorporates the 5%.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Well, I appreciate your time. It just the more clear it becomes, the more I believe it's not to your advantage to not be transparent. So that's kind of dumb not dumb, that's just different to think that that's a worry. That doesn't even come into my head. But it is true that the better myself and everyone understand what all of us do, next meeting, maybe I won't ask this many questions. You never know,
Nah.
I'll find something else, don't worry.
And the thing is,
If I may, Paula and the rest of the board, we are in fact a district that is supposed to be in education. I think it
That's
might
true.
be prudent to form a committee that was a bridge between Nikki and maybe 1 or 2 board members, WTA and CSEA, so that we can better understand this, so that this kind of conversation can happen prior to the board meeting,
Yeah, oh,
right? That's something that makes a lot of sense, of course, so maybe it won't happen.
Well,
Yeah.
but bear in mind that the sole decision of how the money is spent is a board decision.
Well, and the
That's
other
a
thing I
should
would
all
say
be.
is I'm trying to think about.
I would agree with that, except that I don't think the board has any idea how much that COVID money's been spent if I would ask them.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're not really money experts. I mean, some of you might be,
Yeah.
but
So I think I'm just trying to think about like timing wise. There's just such an enormous amount of data that I'm dealing with that it is a push every time trying to get this by deadline. And I'm trying to think about how it would look to back that timeline up even farther in order to do like a work session prior to the meetings. I mean, I 100% agree, like it would be great to sit down with people and discuss like the structure of the budget documents, how to review them, how to look for particular things within them, and even to do that on a regular and ongoing basis. But it's hard for me to imagine, I don't know, like a week or 2 weeks prior to the board meeting already being in a position where I can sit down and go into detail on that current budget, I guess.
What I'm proposing is not 2 weeks before it's due at the board meeting, but over the course of a year.
Just on a regular basis.
Educate each other,
Yeah.
making sure that all parties are on the same page with the budget. I think it's important to include the board members in that so that they can be further educated. Now, I'm in the same boat. I would like further education. And I would say that this document, and this is not, again, I know, Nikki, that this is an insane year. Last year, this was not available until the board meeting either, though. And this is an important piece of information that the public is supposed to get prior to a board meeting, so that we can look it over and have an intelligent conversation about it.
I totally agree. I sort of reach a point where I'm not sure what else to do other than to come to the board and say, can you fund another, budget tech position? Because I am one person and I'm working
A lot
all
of
the time.
I don't know how else to do it. And like I said, every time I think that I'm going to get ahead of the curve, the state throws more at us, and I just end up exactly in the same place. So I certainly would welcome any suggestions if
Well,
people
this
have
is
ideas,
the worst
but
time of the year for everybody. I mean, pretty much school's winding down, everything's a mess. But if there were a couple of weeks out of a couple of months that maybe you weren't on overload, because, I mean, the money never ends, it's always somebody has something that they need. But that's the plan. I would not agree at all to, oh, yesterday, we should have discussed this, because that's nuts. But, I wouldn't think, May is nuts for teachers, June is
But
even
yeah,
a little worse,
I
but,
for sure,
and classified or whoever, I'm sure.
I mean, comes up from our board members.
Yeah.
It continues to be a goal to get these documents out sooner. I continue to try. And I am absolutely on board if people want to, do meetings about the budget documents and how to read them, and or ever have questions, please feel free to email me or call, but yes, to all of those things.
And before you do that, you have to have a session on how does the state fund schools? So you know how they fund schools, and you have to have some budgetary knowledge of assets, liabilities, revenue, expenses. You have to understand those concepts in order to really understand what this is doing. And so my advice would be Capital Advisors has a really good program on how are California schools funded. It's all on video. I've watched it. I watched their weekly presentation they put out on This Week in the Capitol and School Finance. I watch it I listen to it. It's a podcast, basically. I listen to it every week because that's how I try to stay current. Because without that, there's no way to keep, the state's not gonna ever wise up and go, you know what, why don't we trust local control and just raise the amount we give for ADA or reduce the STRS and PERS contributions? Because that's the easy way to fund schools instead of ESSER this and LCAP that and ELO this. I mean, there's so many acronyms, I can't even keep them
Our
straight.
future superintendent, Joe Aldridge, is here, and I'm sure he's listening to all this exciting discussion. And I hope that he's interested in more collaborative leadership. So thank you.
Okay,
So I just want to say the California School Board Association has courses on school finance, and any member of the board here could take them. So they're
Yep.
Zoom meetings, so you can participate from your home.
Does CTA not have a school finance?
It'd be handy, don't you think, if we all kind of had one that was similar, so no one
Yeah,
had to
but
worry.
I'm
that
assuming
he said this
CTA
and
must
she said
have
that.
one.
Yes, we
Oh,
do.
they
and
do.
we're
They have a
looking
great
at
one.
people this summer.
Okay.
But the goal to me is not to be so abrasive to each other. I think if we're all on the same page, we could move forward in a lot more positive light. So that's my purpose for having everybody get together on a scheduled time, maybe quarterly or monthly, so that we can all be up to speed on what the budget is and what the state's doing, so that we don't second guess what the superintendent or the board's doing, right? Because we would know.
And
And we could be informing each other as opposed to arguing over it.
May I just leap in? This is Suzanne Matheson, and I was on the school board in the 80s and 90s. And Brian, we had a budget committee, and I think you have brought up an excellent idea that hopefully we can move forward with as a school community next year. Thank you.
Well, just to comment, Nikki has given me a ton of lessons, okay? And there are still chunks I'm confused because I don't even know the right questions until I have enough information to develop one, you know? That's why to me it's just, I would never imagine that anyone would doubt your skills or your motivation or anything else. You're very available, and that's a big deal because our last one took nearly an hour, which you could have been doing whatever you usually do during that time. It's just a matter of, we are an educational institution. The more of us who know things, especially the same thing, the better for all of us to trust and work together. It just is normal. You do that in anything, I would think.
I'm curious, if we take a look at the warrants, can I track a particular warrant to one of these funds?
Not in this document.
Correct, but if I was
To the fund, you could.
Okay.
The first two digits in the account string is the fund. So when we look at the forms, it always tells you like Form 01, that's general fund, and it'll say 01 as that. So it'll tell you that, but that honestly doesn't get you all that far in terms of knowing where it's at. Now,
Well, my next, kind of setting up for the question is, when we have an audit, I'm assuming that they will be looking at these various coded funds, for example, to make sure that we did follow the rules and spend those funds in the categories that they were supposed to be spent on.
I'm assuming that will be part of the audit guide this year, but we have not gotten details as to what specifically they'll look at, but I would assume there will be components of
With
that.
the amount of money, we're gonna get a single audit on federal funds, for sure.
Yeah, that's one side of it, and then I don't know if, for instance, they look at things like the supplemental concentration grant, like how did we generate the funds, we have our unduplicated count, they ensure that we are correctly claiming that.
Right.
So they look at things like that, so they often do look at those state documents.
That's
and-
fine on the revenue side, but on the expense side, once we've actually determined we've got X amount of revenue, when those revenues are categorized such that we don't get a choice on, per se, on, it's not general fund money, it's stuff with strings attached to it.
Correct.
So there's a set of rules that govern how we spend those dollars.
I'm not sure if that part of it will be in the audit. The reason is that there are state reports that we're already doing. So we're doing quarterly expenditure reports. I mentioned that earlier where I'm trying to think of an example. It's like they'll say, here are the 10 uses within this fund. Tell us how much you did in each category. But they can, depending on the way the laws are written for each funding source, they may or may not be all that useful for our purposes, but from a state perspective, they're saying, oh, you're telling us you met the requirement to use them for these purposes.
So for example, if they give us funds that were designated for PPE, specific to PPE, or now if we spent those funds on a bus, for example, clearly that's not PPE.
Right. I don't know yet what level that our auditors will be doing on the COVID funds specifically.
Okay. All right.
But it's not uncommon for Jeannie to ask me something in warrants to say, hey, I saw this expense, what is it?
Right, and I've done the same thing.
Yeah, and I get right back to her, this is what the expense is, this is who did it, and this is why it was done.
Any further comments or questions on our public hearing for the budget? Hearing none, we will go ahead and close the public hearing on the 21-22 budget. We'll move on to item E, approval of resolution 2020-21-13, elementary assignments in 21-22.
Yeah, this is in regards to middle school specifically, allowing middle school teachers to teach subjects in the 7th and 8th grade. Because normally their endorsements are K5s, but because you have or K6, because you have that environment, it allows teachers to teach at a grade level above what their current certification is. It also allows a teacher, a multi-subject teacher at Bechtel, to teach, for example, an algebra class, which is traditionally a high school credited class. Currently, this is not applicable for us because we don't even have to use this exemption, but we put it in place because right now we don't use it. We're not anticipating using it next year, but if we have a staffing change over the summer, we're not sure if we would need to use it or not. So it's just something you put in place as a precautionary. But there's no intent to have teachers at the middle school teaching out of their area ever.
Got it. Okay. Is there a motion to approve?
I move that we approve resolution for elementary assignments in 21-22.
Is there a
Is there any
second?
discussion?
Is there a second?
I second.
Motion seconded.
Somebody's Brian.
Brian?
Brian.
asked
Go ahead,
if there
Brian.
would be discussion.
This is discussion part now, right?
Yes.
Well, my question is hopefully a simple question. Would this resolution allow an administrator to force a member to move outside of their subject area? Or would it be an option for the member to make that decision?
Well, if you looked at the materials in the packet, it says that it's a mutual agreement between the two.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's part of the ed code piece of it, that it's a mutual agreement. We have no intention of using it. It would be on an emergency basis or a late minute staffing change. Somebody tells us in mid-August that, oh, by the way, I've got a different job or I don't feel like coming back. Yeah.
Well, that brings up my point of what's happened historically is a heavy hand has said, we would really like you to do this, wink, wink, if you like your pink slip, not to go out in March, you'll do this job for us. That's my worry. It'll be used inappropriately.
Well, I don't know who's been heavy-handed or winking, but it wasn't me. So this is something it's only to make sure the school could function and the teacher would need to agree to do it. But, again, there are other options.
Is there a way to add an addendum there where you bring a secondary teacher in when the question was asked of any probationary teacher?
Well, that would be the other alternative the district could use. We could take the least senior person at the high school and involuntary transfer them to the middle school to cover the core subject if we needed to.
My question was, would you be able to put an addendum on it that said if you're asking a probationary teacher to take that site, that they would be with counsel?
You know, just as a side to the contract, every member and every teacher, new as new or old as old, can have a representative
Right.
all of the time. There is no way anybody can prevent them. And the truth is, there was a case that a person wanted to bring someone, for example, WTA, a WTA person wanted to bring a CSEA witness, so to speak. And that's okay too, even though they've been told, no, you can't. Yes, you can. You have the right to bring anyone who makes you comfortable.
The problem, Paula, as you well know, is
Yeah.
that brand new teachers
I
do
know,
not know all these rules
that's
because they
the
are
truth,
brand
that's
teachers
the problem.
and they are abused and used incorrectly.
No, you're absolutely, we have had those.
That's why I bring this point up, because it's happened as recently as this last year. People have been asked and coerced to try to do things that they said they didn't want to do, and they were threatened with being let go because they were probationary. And so this is a huge issue. This type of information and this type of thing does happen in this district, I'm sure as others. But that's my worry, is that Mark will say, we don't intend to use it, it won't happen next year, but oh by golly, next year will come and it will be used.
And
So
it's
that's my worry.
it often comes as often a site administrator will be confronted with, did you know you just said these words? I did not mean them the way they were interpreted. And truthfully, I found in one instance the superintendent knew nothing about it. Now that hasn't been within the last 5 years, but when I did. So no, it's perfectly right to take people who can help you listen, like you would to the doctor or wherever else.
Yeah, and they pay dues, and isn't this WTA's job to inform their members of their rights and dues?
That's
I don't know, I mean, do you want to put it in every single policy?
Yeah, no.
I mean,
No coercion on all the job applications for our administration.
Exactly.
I mean,
whatever.
yeah, the protection is already there through Ed Code. As far as I'm concerned, this is a moot point and not an issue.
Yeah. Some administrators are just, they're enthusiastic.
Is there any other further discussion on elementary assignments in 2021-22? This is a resolution, so we'll call for the vote by roll call. Paul?
Aye.
Jean?
Aye.
Diane?
Aye.
Robert? Aye. Myself, aye. Item F, approval of 21-22 declaration of need for fully qualified educators. This was another one that's every year.
This is an annual, and Paula will give me bonus points on this one.
Yes, we'll see.
We are
You are down.
trending in the right direction.
That's
We
right.
have 4 people who don't have all the full credential, and we are asking for that to be 8, even though we only have 4 now, because we're just trying to have a security blanket because we're not fully staffed yet for next year. We have, I believe, 3 or 4 positions still open, and this talk of hiring specialists, if they come from within the district, we're gonna have to hire somebody else to replace them. So we only have 4 now, which is significantly less than before. And I'm hoping we don't have to use those slots, but we have to designate those up front.
Okay, is there a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
Is there any discussion?
Yes, we've had the discussion over these, it's true. I think it's absolutely inappropriate to have anyone without at least a credential. I had vowed last time that, if you don't at least have a teaching credential, regardless of what the subject matter might be, that I absolutely refuse to vote for it. I still feel that way. However, at this minute, it seems that, from what I know, the need is in special ed more so than,
all the time.
okay,
Because
well,
special ed
yeah.
has all these different categories within themselves.
Right, but we also have a space on here, and I'm trusting that that's just because of the maybe need, because it showed that they weren't just, I mean, it's here it is, 2 multiple subject, 2 single subject, 4 special ed. So currently, where are our right now 4? I understood we had a teacher that was gonna finish things up and let you know that everything was finished. Did that work out?
We had a teacher who didn't meet all their criteria
Okay,
and could not remain multi-subject.
okay.
And so she had to be reassigned for next year, which is done.
Reassigned
She
meaning
has a
still
full
there's.
credential, single subject, but not a multi-subject.
Oh, I see, okay, okay.
Yep.
And then the others are just, hope you don't need them, but you might?
Yep. Yeah, we have 2 special ed openings.
Okay,
And I'm hoping that we can find people who are fully credentialed, but I'm not gonna bet the rent.
okay.
Because when we have these conversations, remember, the state of California opened up all kinds of other windows to allow people into the classroom.
Exactly.
So we're not doing something that's illegal. We're not doing something we can't do. We're not doing something that every district isn't doing. The problem is, it's culminated with a shortage of applicants. So there's a shortage of applicants, and there is a restrictive credentials in special ed and in science sometimes, because science is one of the few that says I'm biology, I'm physics, I'm chemistry. You know, English is English
Yeah,
and math is math. But when you start to get to some of the other ones, they start to disintegrate those and really break them down. And so sometimes it's hard to get just that credential.
okay. This is still a work, I'm sorry.
I have a
This is
little,
Kelly Davis. I think I can answer the special ed question for you.
Oh, thanks.
So in order to teach what we call in Willits our SDC, which is a moderate to severe credential, so that means that you're authorized to teach students with autism or who have severe intellectual disabilities. That is one specific type of special ed credential. In order to teach kids with learning disabilities, kids who have dyslexia or math disabilities that are minor, you have to have a separate credential called a mild mod special ed credential. And what oftentimes happens is that because there's so few fully credentialed special ed teachers in one end or the other, we may bring someone on board that has either neither of those credentials, or they might have a mild mod credential, but they have some skill sets to teach kids with autism, and they have the ability to teach kids with more severe disabilities, but they have to show that they're enrolling in a program to get that mod severe credential. And in the 6 years I've been here in the special, almost every year we have to have people who are enrolling in those credentialed programs, because it's just so hard to find fully credentialed special ed staff. And so we tend to have at least 50% of our special ed staff come in who are not yet fully credentialed in the area that they're going to teach, just because there aren't enough of them. So I hope that makes sense, that there's those separate types of special ed credentials.
And we have contractual limitations where we can't go out and get people who are very experienced from other districts.
You mean go over and invite someone that's already at work?
Somebody
somewhere else?
who's 12 or 13 years somewhere else,
Oh, yeah.
they have to come in at a lower wage for us because we have a contractual limit of 10 years.
Yeah.
And so even if they had the best teacher in the world south of us that we wanted to snag and they wanted to come, there's going to be a pay discrepancy based on we can't grant the experience. So it's very difficult in special ed to find the criteria and the people who have it. And then, are they good at what they do? We're just talking about the piece of paper. We're not even
Yeah.
talking about are they good at what they do.
No, that's true. Well, I just am very concerned that we don't, even if you want to do special ed or whatever is difficult to find, that if at least you have a real credential, that they be given all that you can do to convince them to come, as opposed to someone with no credential at all, or maybe might eventually, because then at least they know that you know how to teach. You just need additional assistance with subject matter. And then certainly, as Kelly says, there are plenty of people, not plenty, there are some people that kind of have that intrinsic skill to teach particular groups of student types, you know, and that's like a little gold mine. But anyway, so long as we're all real clear on that, that's a big deal.
I think we're all pretty much, the goal is to have fully credentialed teachers in every category.
Exactly.
This is nothing more than, like Mark said, it's a stopgap to get us there when we just simply don't have those options.
Yeah.
I mean, our choices are, I mean, if we don't do this and we find ourselves in a bind, what are our options then?
The 30-day sub, I guess, but it just puts a big.
If I may,
Yeah,
call in,
excuse me.
Alex?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mark.
I don't know if we're in a double version of reality here, because you guys are there and I'm raising my hand.
Just sorry. We see your name. No.
Actually,
I
the
think
hand is up.
I think both Paula and Mark are absolutely right, and they're on the same point. And this next year especially is going to be an issue with all the people retiring and getting out because of COVID or you name it. And I think the piece that we're not discussing here is the help that those teachers need. You're asking people to come straight out of college with no credential program, no education on behavior management and scaffolding, all the things that we learned prior to becoming teachers in the field. And often, a week or two before school starts, right? Because you're the person that we needed, and oh my gosh, there's an extra 30 kids. And we're not supporting those teachers, not because we don't want to, but we don't have a plan to help those 4 to 8 that we're talking about right now. And I think that is where we're missing the boat. And I think it's a potential if we land a great fish and we don't help them and they burn out in the first 2 years because they don't have the tools. I think that we've done our site, our community a disservice by not giving them that extra help.
I think all of the insurance and the PIP waivers, I believe they are assigned mentor teachers.
They are.
And see, the issue I have with that is that a mentor teacher is a teacher that's teaching. And so if you're in the middle of being really busy with your own class and your own responsibilities, etc., to give the person who is new and needs the same as every other person in that grade level or that department, plus all the extra, puts a pretty heavy burden on that mentor teacher. I truly believe it's an administrative responsibility. I know I've said that 100 years too, but the point is, an administrator theoretically is the one who goes into the class, observes what's going on, has kind of frequent little talks, and just hope that administrator doesn't have 10 new teachers, I guess. But the point is, they're the ones, it would seem, should be the very best qualified to say, I noticed these things and blah, 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 try this or whatever. Or, hey, you did a really good job, keep that up so you don't burn out, or whatever happens. I do have issue with putting such a burden on teachers, just to put that out there.
Just a little.
Another thing to keep in mind as a board, when you are that beginning teacher without a credential, you're teaching all day and then you're doing the credential program at night on the weekend.
That's it, you're doing bits in the hole. I mean, it's like, I'm sure I can make you fail, give me more time,
Mark, if we're able to put the
Something to think about into the future when we're talking about PIPs, because I can't remember a year when we haven't had them in the past decade.
Yeah, that's
Just to give you a little statistical data, Laura and I had this conversation a year ago, and we looked back at our non-renewals. More of them were credentialed teachers than non-credentialed teachers.
And you said that, and I really wondered about why that was, but I never.
Just because that's a skewed statistic.
Well,
Because
that's
by
what
the-
that would
if
say.
you're non-renewal, you're a tenured teacher, I mean, you have a credential.
You're a credentialed teacher, exactly.
No, it's
If you
not.
get your credential in the first
We're
year.
talking, no, it's not skewed at all. We talked about the people who we either asked not to return or we did the official non-renewal of. I was not talking about just non-renewals. I was talking about all the people who mutually left or left because we said, you must go, and they didn't agree. I'm including both of those. And honestly, some of really quality staff we have are people who came in without a credential. So it's not always that person. Most of it has to do with personality and has to do with interaction and the ability to work with kids. So that supersedes a piece of paper on a regular basis. So I wouldn't lump them all into the same category.
Oh,
One thing,
Okay.
I have a question.
Amy Groves has her hand raised on.
Amy, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. Thank you, Paula. I agree with helping those teachers in the classroom. I was a mentor teacher for a PIP teacher, and during the, going back to campus and all of the things that go along with a brand new teacher, it's really helpful if the new teacher could have a mentor that goes in and observes. I couldn't. I have my own classroom to run and I would have to get a sub or whatever. But I really think that it would help them to have someone that could go in and observe and help them with behavior management, because that is like probably the biggest burnout for a teacher, is to know how to handle situations in the classroom. And I, of course, help with curriculum planning at, so many hours a week, but new teaching goes beyond curriculum planning. It goes with how to handle your classroom. So I just want to chime in on that. There's just not enough hours of my day as a mentor to be able to help that PIP teacher as much as she would need or could have received if someone from outside helped her instead of me.
Is this an area where you could leverage some of your retired teachers?
Absolutely.
That would be
They
amazing.
would come back to work.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking in terms of if an administrator goes in, finds a beginning teacher struggling with certain elements.
We have the model in place already. Betty Meineke does this in special ed as a retired teacher.
Right, I would argue that if we have that in just general population,
Yep.
we reach out to some of the retirees that can still offer something. They don't have to be here on a full-time basis, come in on an as-needed basis. Is that something that's reasonable?
I think it is, if that's what somebody wanted to do, provided they had the skills in particular that mentor's going to need. Sure, I think that's great. It's a little difficult to determine whether they do or don't, maybe, depends on who. I mean, everybody has different styles, I'm certain, and so that, it might be a bit of an issue, but it shouldn't be that big of a deal. This district brought back a number of retired types to do a variety of things this year, and I think the year before that, I remember.
I mean, I'm just thinking leverage the experience.
Exactly.
And they don't have to be committed to something long-term.
Well, and see, that's something this district has sort of lost by who knows why, when old retiring teachers leave and the new ones come in, usually there's kind of a little crossover, and yet lately, like the past 7 or 8 years, whatever it's been, chunks of teachers retired, and then chunks of brand news keep showing up. They have no one to watch or to model, because still, I mean, we sort of lost some of our afternoon study afternoons, or whatever we called those. What were those called? PL days or something, whatever they're called. Anyway, those are coming back, I imagine, but whatever. Used to be you got a chunk for all people in a grade level to talk with each other, and you had long-term and brand new, besides your grade level chair. But lately, a lot of that, if the chair is as new as the people they're working with, how good is that? You know, I mean, it's just difficult. Anyway, I had a question, please. It says, list each college or university with which you participate. It's Dominican, Humboldt State, Sonoma State, I could probably understand those guys. National Brandman, University of Phoenix, all those guys are online or whatever, is that it? Because I don't see anybody cruising the,
Well, and the
Phoenix.
reason they're on there
mm-hmm,
is because of the expense. This is very expensive for a teacher to get these endorsements. And so they're shopping for the best price. That's why it lists some of those others. We haven't had Dominican in multiple years
well,
anyway.
that's good. I
And
mean, in the
so-
old days, that would have been
but-
really good.
Some of them now, especially in the online world, are looking for, if I'm gonna get the same credential, who gives it to me at the best price? And so,
And then
Okay.
also access, right? So
Right.
you're not having to drive to SCO or
Right.
whatever.
Joe Aldridge has
Sonoma
his hand
State.
raised.
Joe Aldridge is on there.
Okay.
Oh, okay, well, that was
Yep.
my thing, that I needed to know, where are those guys? Okay.
Any other questions?
And I just wanted to make, if I could, a point on the support for new teachers. If we don't have someone who is a retiree or available in the area, there are some services that we can relatively inexpensively contract with. We'll provide a dedicated coach for that person in a non-evaluatory sort of way to support them as well. So there are some resources out there. Zoom has opened up a whole world of this kind of thing. So, you know, we will have some options as a more remote place to support that.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay, so we, been motioned and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor of approving item F, declaration of need for fully qualified educators, say aye.
I,
I'm just,
Come on, Paula, spit it out.
I know, spit it out. We have improved, so I must say aye, I suppose. But next time I'm saying no, because now the bar is at 8 or 6, okay? I want us at 0.
I'm buying a lotto ticket out of my home.
Well, you know, that was lucky. I'm not buying one, no.
Thank you, Paula.
Yeah.
Okay, we're at item G, approval of the 2021-2022 annual statement of need 30-day substitutes.
Well, first of all, we need substitutes. Secondly is occasionally the district has people in these scenarios with certifications and things. So a practice that Laura used was if these programs aren't granting the credentials in time, so if they don't have them by August 20 when we start, Laura has required them to get a sub-permit because we have to say to the state that everybody we have in the classroom meets criteria. And if they don't have the piece of paper yet, sometimes they're meeting the criteria by a 30-day sub-permit until their stuff comes in. And so it's a way for the teacher to, so we're not dinged for not being certified credentialed. And also, it protects them. And we don't do anything to them. We don't go back and punish them financially or anything. But, you know, we have to cover ourselves so we have credentialed teachers.
And so they're paid at the standard long-term sub rate of pay for that month or whatever? Or are they given what they
Yeah.
think they're gonna get when they're contracted?
The 2 times we've used it, they have been paid at the long-term sub rate.
Oh, okay.
As soon as their credential came in, we went back and retroed
You
them the
retroed
rest
it?
of their money.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not holding against them because their college didn't.
Yeah.
I know some think I'm mean and cruel and unusual,
Thanks,
but
yeah.
I actually give them those funds back
Okay.
because we hired them with the intent that we were going to pay them as a teacher. And so if we have to use that to stay credentialed, we do go back and give them those funds.
And unfortunately, we've absolutely seen a decline in the responsiveness of the commission over the course of
Right.
the last year. Like, they have not done a great job during COVID.
Yeah.
It took a really long time to get a lot of people's like paperwork through. And it's not the fault of the employee, it's not the district, it's literally just waiting to hear back from the commission sometimes takes a really long time. So it just, I think, having that in place just in case is a good thing.
They're not really a clearinghouse, they're more of a storage facility.
Right.
So can we have a motion?
I move that we agree with the 30-day substitute.
And second?
I'll second.
Is there any further discussion? We'll call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And we are at Joe's part of the meeting. Item H, approval of employment agreement for district superintendent for 3-year contract. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve.
I second.
Oh, excuse me.
It's been motioned and seconded. Is there a discussion?
Just want to say thank you. I'm really looking forward to the opportunity, and my family and I are just so excited to be up there. So, with this, I wish they could be here with me tonight, but I just stayed in the office because it was a quieter environment as we're getting everything ready to move and whatnot. But I really do appreciate the opportunity, and I'm excited to get there and build on the great work that Mark and the board have been working on, and work with the community to really keep us moving forward.
Thanks, Joe. We're looking forward to having you.
And the length of the meeting is not indicative of the norm.
Although.
Lies.
IT says lies.
Yeah.
Any further discussion on the contract? Call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
You bet?
I did, I even said it.
Okay, very good. You're on board, Joe.
Yeah. Although, the
Awesome.
newspaper knew
I'm so
before
happy.
us, right?
Okay, we're moving to item I, acknowledgement of a first read for board policy 3100 budget. This is the debate on our fund balance, reserve for economic uncertainties. I believe you are right, it's missing that one section.
Yes.
And if you could bring that back to,
That would be incorporated for the second one.
okay.
Yeah. We're comfortable with 250, right?
Yes,
Okay.
or even 200, I personally, if there's a reasonable, I kind of defer to you. This is a strange year with the COVID funds, so it's extreme and will be so for the next 2 years in terms of those one-time funds. But truthfully, we really don't want any significant one-time funds impacting that calculation for that reserve for economic uncertainties. If 200, 250, even 100,000, you guys got to tell me tell us whether or not it's reasonable to try and exclude those.
I'd rather not go below 200 because we tend to get into some types of funds where on the outset they seem like a one-time fund. So CSI is a grant that we have at Bechtel, and it was like 1 year, and then now we have it at the second year. And they tend to be in that range between 100 and 200, and then they end up kind of onboarding as like regular onboarding funds. I think 200 is a more natural line between where we see genuinely those like big one-time grants. So I'm fine with 200. If you'd rather do 200, we can do that.
Okay, and the rest of the board?
For comments?
Well, yeah.
Or you mean $200,000?
$200,000.
Oh, okay.
Excluding.
Yeah, no, I'd like it to be as small as would be manageable.
Yeah.
I get really concerned when an amount of money to be set aside is $100,000, and it's like you said, well, this is one time. But we are gonna do it for the next 3 years. I really wanna see that in the budget, and I don't wanna look at it as, oh gosh, I can only one-time money it.
Well, and remember that when we're talking about excluding it, so ultimately the real impact to the reserve is the 17% of the expenditure that occurs for that year. So like if you had a $200,000 grant, you're looking at $30,000 as how much of your reserve you want to set aside. And it doesn't mean you're setting aside any of those one-time funds. It's just how much of your reserve are you identifying as that 17%. So I think that...
Yeah, it's just sometimes that makes a big enough chunk that you could buy something of value, an aid for the classroom or whatever, I mean, part-time maybe, but at least there, or a practically full-time bus driver. I mean,
And that's
These
the
are,
reason why I want to limit that, so that it
Exactly.
doesn't have a detrimental impact on how we manage that part of the budget.
oh, okay, that's, maybe I had it backwards.
With respect to that single line item, reserved for economic uncertainties,
Yes.
who makes the determination that we will use those funds for anything? And what categories, or to say, what kinds of expenses would those things actually fit?
Well,
I understand the utilization of the fund for cash flow purposes, because we're not actually using those monies other than just to bridge a gap, because we know those other funds are coming in.
temporary.
I'm talking about actual issues that would cause us to dip into those funds.
I would think that generally speaking, it would, if you have a board policy in place designating it, then it would probably be a board decision if you were to want to use it. Now, that being said, I think the question came up when Mark and I looked at this policy, like, what time are you looking at that and making that decision? Because ultimately, when we look at a multi-year projection, well, we're showing that percentage across 3 years. And you could ultimately see, wow, if in the third year we are deficit spending and it's dipping into that number, but that's third year out. You're not necessarily spending the funds and you're not making it, you might make a decision to avoid that outcome. But so we did add in a little bit of language that talked about if it were to fall below at closing. So if we say we're closing the books and something, we've gotten to that point where it has dipped below that, and or the board has made the decision actively to use the fund for something, that then the board shall establish a plan to bring it back up to that threshold.
Okay. So essentially, what we're coming down to is, let's assume for the sake of argument that the state decides to, because of some economic downturn, cuts our budget by 6%. At some point, we recognize that cut, and rather than, and if we don't anticipate that problem to be long-term, we may dip into that fund if the board so chooses to maintain status quo.
And I would think that if you were having that discussion, it would likely be that you're at budget adoption, you're looking out into the year, and let's say it was last year, and that governor's proposal from last year were approved. That could be a circumstance where you have something thrown at you out of the blue, a very short period of time to respond to it, and you as a board decide, we will use that to get through this short period of time. I think that you could make those decisions. I think we always want to keep in mind too that no matter what, there's a state minimum, but obviously that's a very low number, and I hope we would never even approach that number because it would be quite irresponsible.
And in fairness, you're kind of off in the weeds on this policy right now, because the reality is pick a percentage and stay with it. And if you can't match that percentage, you have a financial crisis year. The board should have a plan to get back to that. That's the real substance of the policy. It's not how you necessarily, if you get $200,000 in one-time money from the state or feds, you can guarantee it's earmarked for a very specific thing that you can't do anything else with.
Yeah.
They're not just tossing you 200 and go, hey, do whatever you want with it.
We wish they would.
Yeah, so it's gonna be earmarked. So I think the real substance of the policy is set a percentage you want for fund balance, and understand that if you can't meet it for some reason in a year, establish a plan, which means adjust your budget to get to that.
Yep. Makes perfect good sense. So we've had a first read. There will be some additional language in there. We'll set 200,000.
That's good.
Okay. And we are at public comments for items not on the agenda.
No, we're not done.
Oh, no?
Please. I mean, I have two things about this. One, I don't like the 17%. I know that I made that clear last time. And I know that it will take a vote or whatever, but I just think that 17% is way too high. And we'll discuss that probably next time more. And then the paragraph under that, I'm sure it's me, but I'm having trouble understanding it. It says, so in any year following the fiscal year in which the district is notified that the SPI, by the SPI, that the amount of monies in the state public school system stabilization account equals or exceeds 3% of the combined total of general fund revenues appropriated for school districts and allocated local proceeds of taxes, the district budget shall not contain a combined assigned or unassigned ending general fund balance that is in excess of 10% of these funds, unless the requirement is waived in accordance with the Ed Code.
So with the Ed Code, we are not in that category.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's part of CSBA's standard language, but we fall within that
That
waiver
was tough, I
because
couldn't understand.
small,
That's
that
my
does
point.
not apply to small districts.
Oh, okay, oh, okay, well,
That's
that's
my
good.
point
We'll just
about
put a
having to
little
go to a
line
school
through it.
finance class.
Oh, okay, well.
Because that's all, that's the other crazy thing is
Uh-huh.
what's basic aid and why do you still have to do, why does Mendocino have to do all this LCAP stuff when they're basic aid? They still do. And so that's part of understanding the finances, that Ed Code, like I said, Ed Code can tell you whatever you want it to tell you. Just look at the next one.
And it'll
But when
be-
you find it, it gets used in this funding. And this funding and finance is tied into Ed Code tooth and nail.
And it's very convoluted in areas.
Yeah.
Well, okay, because some of them were just as bad, but if you read them 20 times, it kind of makes sense. But then that one, I was lost completely. Sorry. I mean, if I'm going to read it, isn't that what reading is? Understanding.
It's the comprehension that you're
That's I
having,
messed
Paul.
up, okay?
You
I
can
want
read the
more
word, you gotta
comprehension.
work on your comprehension skills.
God, I wonder if it's, no.
So anything else on item I?
Hmm.
Okay, we've got our first read, we'll get our second read at the next meeting. Public comments for items not on the agenda.
I have two things. I'm not
Of
letting
course.
you go home. Of course I have things.
What do
I
you got, Paul?
noticed in the little budget, not the little budget, but the paying out of the bills, the signs that I have been waiting 6 months for are finally, they've been paid for, so I trust they're coming in and will be posted.
They are
They've
starting
already,
to go
yeah,
up.
we wouldn't pay for them if we didn't already have them.
Oh,
They've started to
great.
go up already.
Have they? Well, I
have one,
didn't
I
see
have
it
the
yet.
sample in my truck. I
Do
will
you,
give it
would
to
you
you.
give it to me? I want it
In
posted
case you're wondering,
large.
Paul, by law, we can't pay for anything unless we have it.
Oh, darn. I do that all the time.
Yeah, so did I.
Okay.
I'm gonna put that sign on your car.
You should,
That
because I
have you
don't have
recorded.
audio
I have you
cameras in
recorded.
my, there you go.
But Catherine McKay has her hand up.
What?
Catherine.
Catherine McKay has her hand up.
Go ahead, Catherine.
Public comment on a non-agenda item. Thank you. After listening to the lengthy conversation about the fiscal wellness of WUSD, my comments address some of that fiscal wellness. Let me identify myself. I am Catherine McKay. I am a real teacher with my clear credential. I teach at Bethel Grove Middle School, and I'm also a member of WTA, CTA. I am one of only 4 teachers who were willing to work summer school this summer at Bethel Grove. More importantly, I recognize the pivotal role that summer school will play in mitigating the learning loss of too many of our WUSD students and assisting them in re-engaging with their education. Currently, there are 84 students enrolled for summer school at BGMS. This is approximately 1/3 of the student population at Bethel Grove, or better yet stated, 1 complete grade level. I'm concerned about the lack of recognition and compensation for this vital session of instruction. Our surrounding districts within Mendocino County are receiving additional stipends minimally at the rate of about $100 per day per teacher in addition to their per diem pay. These stipends are being underwritten by COVID funds. I would encourage our Board of Trustees to instruct Mr. Westerberg in the rest of his tenure to engage in productive negotiations with WTA, reflecting the importance of that learning loss mitigation. And in closing, in not respecting and valuing our teachers, WUSD is not valuing the children of our community. Simply stated, you don't value our teachers, you don't value our children. You value our children, you value our teachers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any comments?
On what she said?
Hmm?
Yeah, I think that's kind of reasonable. I just kind of hate to see negotiations in public is all.
I really like to see them in public.
I don't.
I think California loves transparency. Why in the
They
world do
do.
you not negotiate in public if you like transparency?
Well, just because things get said and unsaid and people get confused as to exactly where you stand.
I'll record it.
Excuse me?
I'll record it.
The negotiations?
No,
It's worse. They're
I've sent a note
families.
back to Tessa, we continue to talk, so we'll see where we go.
Sounds good, thank you.
That is not what was said. I
What?
would like to clarify what Mark just said is an untruth.
Oh,
As in,
I don't believe that your note said, let's continue to talk. I believe your note said, sign it and we're good.
I believe what we've just said right here in this meeting is that we'll continue to talk.
That's what I heard from you, Alex.
I just heard it from the superintendent as well. I would disregard whatever the note said.
Excellent,
okay,
thank
last
you.
news.
Let's see, we are at public comments for items not on the agenda, I think.
That was, we're doing.
that was it.
That was it?
Yeah, oh,
Okay. And I'm interested in looking at adding, going to a 2-meeting per month schedule.
I think that's a good idea. Can we make it first and third, or is it definitely second and what?
I think that's completely up in the air, so let's take a look at it
First
at our
and
next,
two?
our next
Oh,
meeting.
Okay.
So does that mean meetings will be half as long?
I'm hoping so.
Not necessarily, folks. How big is your
I think
agenda?
Richard's gonna be the most difficult to tie into it.
Oh, well,
I'm glad I'm already full.
City meetings one and
they're
first and
tonight,
third?
yeah,
Or
they're
we're
third.
competing with them?
No, the city is the second, right? Of
Okay.
course, when we have extra meetings, then it doesn't matter, but I mean, I don't have to go to the city, it's.
Well, I'm hoping to.
I figured we'd get more people.
Oh, there you
on
go.
Zoom.
We do get a bunch on Zoom,
And the
which I
parents
think,
really
I
like
really
this
wish
because
everybody went to
This is how
this.
many people we have at a regular meeting when we want.
No, it was getting better,
Well,
and
I'm
then
hoping
it
to
stopped.
spread the load out over 2 meetings and
Yeah,
minimize
that's
the
good.
number of special meetings we actually have to come back for.
Well, then I'd really go.
So these
for
would
it.
be actually scheduled on a more regular basis.
And you could not have a meeting if you don't have anything to do.
Exactly, and I would like to see all of them with closed sessions.
And I would also like to, I'm hoping that when we do this sort of thing, that maybe when we're looking at financial data, we get it at one meeting and we actually can act on it at the next one.
That's a good idea, then you have time to study.
I don't know if that will fit
Does that help?
into,
No.
No,
You
because
can't have
within
every
that
meeting
week,
with
she'll
closed
get
session.
another.
There's criteria to go into closed session that you have to meet.
so let's look at that next meeting
Okay.
on the agenda.
Oh, okay, closed sessions.
So, anything further?
Confirming that the 16th will be open to the public?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, please, Alex. This is Tessa.
Hi, Tessa.
I've heard from members in the community that have really enjoyed the option of attending school board meetings via Zoom.
I would hope we continue
It gives
that.
them an opportunity to actually listen in, and they were wondering if this could be a continuing format.
It certainly is for the short term, and I have no issue with it long term personally. Hopefully, certainly something we can discuss further, but I see no issue with not continuing something like this.
I think it's a really
Awesome,
good idea.
thank you.
The more involvement, the better.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
All right, I move.
Why?
That we close this. Hey, I've still got more to say. No, that we can close. You know, I was an excellent limited English speaker teacher because you talk
I believe I heard Paul
nonstop.
motion to adjourn.
I did. So second.
Diane for a
Let's go.
second. All in
No.
favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye, God, did I not say it? No.
Thank you, everyone.